The road north narrowed into a ribbon of frost that tugged at iron shoes and bit through leather and patience alike, and the column that crawled along it looked more like a habit than an army. Kings ought to arrive like thunder, for years that had matched Robert's appetite and memory both, but the north wore down thunder to a dull rumble and set it walking. He felt it in his joints, a heavy ache that even the saddle's fur-edged pads could not soften. The stag's standard in the wind looked too hard and bright for the sky around it. Bleached blue, thin and cold, a sky that had to be cut before it would give up snow. The towers of the castle watched them approach. The gates blinked and narrowed. Steam rose from the nostrils of horses and the mouths of men. Robert's breath came in plumes that smelled faintly of wine and clove and old bear fur. The cloak slung across his shoulders scratched his neck like a memory he could not dislodge. He turned his head and saw his queen riding a little apart, precise as a golden-hilted knife, her hair a banner of its own, her mouth composed. Joffrey beside her wore finery that looked ill at ease on the raw road, yet he bore the cold better than he bore any delay, and his impatience came off him like heat. Behind them trailed the little brother and the bigger brother that never trailed anyone. Tyrion's laugh had been snatched off by the wind several times. Jaime's silence gleamed like a mirror that showed you what you wished were there. Robert tightened his knees. The horse responded with a stamina he envied. He remembered this road younger, remembered snow that had seemed a novelty, remembered an old friend with honest eyes and a word that could be relied upon. Carlin or Torin or one of the granite names that clung to the place, no, Ned. Ned's eyes had not changed in memory. Steady as a hearth he'd come to warm himself by after hunts that went nowhere. He thought of Ned's sister and forced that thought into the place in him where such things went, the place like a cold cellar with stone steps and a bar across the door. The gates swallowed them, banners dipped. He heard the seals and hinges of Winterfell's mouth accept him with the groan of seasoned wood. Men leaned into the work of it, faces red and wet with effort, and then the courtyard opened. The smell changed at once, from blank cold and dung to smoke and stewing meat and hot iron, and something that lived underneath all that, the wet mineral exhale of old stone warmed from within. This was a castle that had not been lifted up, but had grown here as naturally as a frost-hewn cliff. It was a fit place for graves and for oaths, and Robert felt the pull of both. Ned was there, waiting, and time moved oddly. Robert saw the boy he'd liked and the man he could trust at once. The lines had deepened, but they were the same lines, and the mouth that had never practiced flattery still looked as if it wouldn't know where to start. They embraced. Robert clapped him too hard and laughed too loud because that had always been how one smothered the other thing that rose in him when he saw this man. The old joke was on his tongue and he swallowed it. He would not count years aloud in this square. He looked beyond Ned then and took in the household and the flock of the north. The lady stood with her children. She had a lynx's watchfulness and a look at him like winter sunlight, thin, polite, withheld. The children were a gradient from seriousness to wildness. The elder boy with the stark face, another boy with hair like crow wings and that same sharp plane to the cheek and the mouth. The red-haired girl who had arranged her smile as carefully as the ribbons at her sleeve. A smaller girl who had done no arranging at all and seemed to be measuring every new thing for whether it could be climbed. Two younger boys still pinned by their nurses' hands. And a dark, pale creature silent behind them all. Not a dog. It stood at the tall boy's hip, almost white with the faintest sheen of color like the moon behind cloud, eyes red as coals. Something in Robert's shoulder tightened and then relaxed like a muscle catching. He had known men who named weapons to fill some hollowness of their own. This animal's presence made the hollowness into something else. It made the world around it honest. Winterfell, Robert said, too loud for the space and the wind, and he made a show of taking it all in. Jaime's horse stamped behind him, and the queen moved forward with the grace that had never yet slipped from her. Ned's courtesy words were the right ones. They went where courtesy said they should, into warmth, into meat and drink, into rooms that were warmer than the yard and as old. Jon watched it all from a half-step behind Robb, at the place where the edges of the household blurred and no one was sure if he ought to stand in the first row or the second. The place had suited him so long that it felt chosen rather than assigned, and yet a part of him, quiet but persistent, rolled a kernel of irritation in its fingers as the guests moved past and their eyes hopped from face to face like birds taking seed, and sometimes the hop skipped him. The king's gaze did not. When it came to him, it stuck as if a burr had taken hold of the velvet lining of a cloak. For an instant, Jon saw a man whose features were struggling with their shape. The remnants of handsomeness scattered over a landscape where too much meat and too much wine had scrawled their claims. A laugh waiting behind the lips and a memory behind the eyes. It was not the gaze in his father's face, and Jon felt it like a warm gust on cold skin, startling and pleasant and wary-making at once. He did what he always did when noticed. He bowed his head. Ghost stood whitely, and the king's gaze flicked down to the pale animal and back. Later, the yard breathed again. Men shouted at horses, and the horses put their ears back at the dogs, and the dogs ignored everyone for their own jokes. Jon stood to the side and felt the yard's pattern settle around the royal party like a new piece in an old weave. He held Ghost's scruff, and the wolf allowed it as if it was a courtesy rather than a right. Robb leaned in and knocked his shoulder with the ease of a boy who had never had to wonder where to stand. "That's the king," Robb said under his breath, uselessly and happily. "That's a lot of fur," Jon answered, because anyone could see the cloak. They were allowed to make jokes at objects. "We'll show them the yard later," Robb said, hungry to be praised by men who had watched wars. "Father will want to hunt. Gods, imagine it. A boar with those tusks the steward swears is in the wolfswood. Watch it make a meal of you." Theon cut in from the lean where he had taken up residence, his grin sharp as a fishbone. "And blame your boots for slipping." Robb grinned at him and then back at Jon. "We'll have them tonight. We'll have them, and then there's talk father's friend wants him for his hand. If he goes south, they will want you to remember names," Jon said lightly. He felt that kernel again, rubbing. The South was a tongue he had never had reason to practice, and it would shape Robb in his absence whether Robb liked it or not. The girls came tugging at the air. Sansa carried herself like a candle, careful not to drip. Arya arrived like wind flattened by a doorway. The smaller boys were being peeled off their nurses' skirts, Bran making bargains, Rickon refusing to have anything to do with bargains and going wherever his feet liked. Ghost turned his head to look at the little one passing. Rickon put a hand out, and Jon saw that small fingers had already learned how to move slowly toward this creature. The wolf's nose touched knuckles that smelled of bread. Rickon beamed as if he had discovered this trick by himself. They were all lit, all of them, by the novelty of having the South here. Even the older faces had a faint shine to them as men remembered that they had stories that might be useful again. Only their lady looked at the courtyard and saw work rising like steam from the stones. Jon felt her glance brush him, that familiar coolness, and looked away before it could become a longer thing. He told himself that later he would slip to the hall gallery and watch the meal from the angle where one sees if men like their food, or out along the wall walk where he could look down like a crow. He did not tell himself that he would catch the king's voice and keep it in memory. He did not need to. He already knew a true laugh from an arranged one, and he had heard the first. The feast rang. Winterfell did not know how to be gaudy, but it knew how to be generous, and every roasted thing that could be coaxed to a table was set upon one, so that the heads of the boar and the trout and the goose sat like odd courtiers among the metal and wood. The smell was rich enough to repaint the air. Lords who had come with the king talked as if they were carving the North's character into their bread with their knives as they ate, and the queen smiled when she felt like it and not otherwise. Her brother with the scarless face made the stone around his chair seem polished by proximity. Her brother with the size of a badger, and twice the mischief turned his cup and made comments that could have been jokes or lessons depending on your angle. The king, when he laughed, drew every head, and when he pounded his cup it seemed like something decided. It would be said later that he drank too much, and that would be true. It would also be said that he was larger than his body, and that was true also, and a stranger thing to carry. Jon stood in the gallery with the smoke and the spoon boys and the kitchen girls who had climbed the flight with platters balanced like towers. From here he could see the king's broad hands as they cut meat too extravagantly and shook with remembered melee, and the way his father's head tilted when he listened, the tiny shift that meant amusement and the tinier still that meant caution. He could see Lady Stark's face when the king called for more and more of something, a face that counted stores and winters in the same glance. Theon was down there, passing remark to someone who did not care about it at exactly the volume that made men look anyway. Robb was shining. He had never before looked like a man who would one day be sung about, and now Jon thought he did, and felt the kind of pride that has a bruise in it. When he glanced toward the high end of the table again, he saw the queen looking toward the gallery. No, not the gallery. Upward. The smoke had gathered in a shawl along the high curve of the hall, and she appeared to be noting its composition for faults. But her eyes came away and went briefly to the boy at her side. The boy's hair caught the light like a handful of coins, and his profile, turned, looked like something cut to show off a carver's precision. He said something. The queen smiled. Jon didn't think of his own hair, though he had cut it yesterday with the little knife and the mirror that belonged to no one. He thought of his father's silence over questions. He thought that the king's laugh was a happier thing to catch than the queen's smile. "Don't lean over," a gentle voice said next to him. It belonged to the woman who towered over the kitchen with the easy, absolute mathematical sense that fed a castle. She had smudges of flour across her arms like ferns. "You'll drip on lords with tunics finer than their wits." "I'll be careful," Jon said and stepped back. A draft from the corner lifted the smoke, and he heard the king asking for music and stories, and for someone to bring him the Stark he remembered and not the one with the straight back and the measured words. Laughter. Jon did not see his father's face, but he knew it. The way the muscles would decide that friendship demanded you do the thing you didn't wish to do, and then do it gravely rather than sourly. He went out on the wall walk when the hall had found a rhythm that would last till the candles gave up. From there he could see the yard lit by scattered torches and the stars beyond it that looked as if they had never thought of moving. The night had sharpened. He could feel it in his teeth. Ghost moved beside him like a piece of night that had changed its mind about what shade it wanted to be. A soft thudding behind made the boards lean and creak, and then a figure came around the angle of the parapet, holding a cup, hair tossed by the same draft that had lifted the smoke. The size was wrong for a threat you keep in the fore of your mind. Jon said nothing. The cup-bearing man looked at the wolf and then at Jon and then at the drop beyond the wall with interest that had a boyishness in it. "Do you often drink your air from up here?" the small man asked. His voice had the southern polish on it and the grit of having been used. "I recommend it. It's cleaner. And one can be forgiven, up here, for saying aloud what in gentler rooms has to stay wrapped in cleverness." "I'm not much for cleverness," Jon said, "because kindness sometimes wore that posture. And this is where I come when I don't want to be anyone in particular." "Ah, that's a more interesting reason." The man leaned his back against the Merlin with two small grunts, adjusted his cup to the angle of his body, and took a drink. "It seems to me that when one is nobody, one can see everybody else better. Look," he gestured with the cup. "Down there in the torchlight, your prince practicing how to scowl at torches. It is excellent practice. Torches can't be offended and tell his mother. He'll be a master at it by spring." "He's not my prince," Jon said with a reflex that surprised him. The man's eye flashed. He took another drink. "Not yours," he agreed. "Nor mine. Mine would be, well, I suppose my prince would be whatever keeps me from being crushed when great boots go stomping. I am not particular. Survival makes a poor snob. But that one, he is very particular." Jon looked down into the yard. Joffrey had come out with two boys his own age, and they were showing each other how far their arms could stretch when loaded with bravado. The look on his face was the look of someone who believes the world has been arranged correctly because he is in the center of it. Jon did not mind the look by itself. It was the way it slipped when things didn't immediately comply and then came back again. "What would you think if someone told you he might be king?" the small man asked evenly. "Someone already has told me," Jon said. "He's the son of the king. People with mothers like that and uncles like that usually get what they want." The man said. "Mothers like that and uncles like that usually want the world arranged so that getting what they want is good for others too. It's a trick I admire." Jon glanced at him. "You are not what I look like," the man said. "One tires of saying it, but I am a Lannister. The one people find it easiest to look at when they need to think ill of a Lannister without getting themselves in trouble. This made Jon smile, which felt like an easement inside the tightness that had crept into him. "I'm Jon," he said. "I suppose that makes me easy to look at when one wants to think ill of a Stark. It's simpler to do it that way." "Yes," the man said. "You make a good target for all sorts of laziness. Useful in its way. It can give you the time and quiet to become yourself. But then sometimes men decide to notice you, and everything changes." Ghost lifted his head and made a sound so soft it could have been the timber sighing again. Jon laid a hand on the sleek skull and felt the weight of it steady him. "Do you think they'll notice me?" he asked. He did not know why he asked it, but the man had introduced a frankness into the night that wanted feeding. "Tonight." The small man's eyes tipped up to measure the stars, though what he weighed there Jon could not tell. "Someone will, just by chance. Space rearranges itself around certain presences whether they mean it to or not." He did not have to say whose presence. "I'm going to the wall soon," Jon said. "After this." He tilted his head toward the hall that still throbbed with music in the way of a body that does not know yet that in an hour it will tire. "It's decided." "Ah," the man said, genuinely interested. "That is one way to keep from being noticed, or to be noticed by fewer with better reasons. I am told some men find themselves there. Others vanish usefully. Either way, it's cold." "I don't mind the cold," Jon said. "No," the man said quietly. "You don't, do you?" They stood in weather that had the clean bite of a new blade. The cup sloshed twice more, and then the small man bowed to Jon with a formality that did not mock, and to the wolf with a caution that did not flatter, and went back the way he'd come. Jon watched him go and then looked out again at the sky where the stars were busy being indifferent. Down below in the hall, the king found his way outside of laughter for a time. The weight of food and the weight of friendship and the weight of long memory had settled into him. He wanted a different weight. He stood from the table with a levered heave that only Ned knew how to disguise with words, and he made a suggestion that was not quite a command, but the hall heard it as one. "Take me where the North keeps its dead." Ned's mouth tightened, and then, because there would have been a worse insult in refusal than in the courtesy of compliance, he rose and without fanfare led the way. A few men made to accompany them. A glance in the Queen's direction sent them another way. Jaime came as far as the stairs and then peeled off. The hall closed above them like a hand closing against a draft. They went down. The air changed in the way that always persuades a man to quiet. Stone constricted. Moisture condensed in places ancient enough to have their own weather. Robert remembered that he had been here young and furious and stupid and sweet, that he had looked at the face he'd come to see and had almost convinced himself it would change if he stood long enough and willed it. He had wanted to steal a body away from time. It had not seemed too audacious an idea then. All the audacity had gone into him like hot iron into a mold. What came out had hardened differently than he imagined. He had believed he knew the shape of triumph. He had not. Ned's lantern threw measured light. "This is foolish," Robert said finally, because otherwise the not saying of it would strangle him. "I'll get melancholy down here, and you'll get that particular patience you wear when I'm being tedious and neither of us will sleep." "It was your suggestion," Ned said. He had the great good habit of not trying to fix what could not be fixed. "And you agreed," Robert said, and they walked along the stone passage with the old kings of winter looking with the composure of men who had had their say and were comfortable with the results. "Gods, I forget how much you have in you, Ned. A man can lean on it and not even notice he's leaning until he's too comfortable to bother standing on his own feet." Ned's silence accepted the words and did not make ceremony of them. They came to her. Robert looked. The space behind his ribs tensed, and then, less than he expected, the tightness let out of him like breath after a held plunge. Those girls' boys keep inside them until they're men. One is always surprising, always remains a girl no matter how many feasts or wars the man endures. Robert's had been a horse girl with flowers and a fierce mouth. She had never lost her girlness in him. The stone did things to her he did not like. That was good. It broke a spell. The North did not permit you to keep illusions where bones had to last.
love.
Heir, he said. They had been through this. It was like reciting so that a vow kept its shape. I loved her, and if I had been half the man I thought I was. You loved her, Ned said, because the second half of that sentence could not be finished and would only spoil the air. And she died, and I brought home a boy to my hearth and raised him. Robert's head lifted at that last as if a scent had come into the space. He turned and looked at his friend in a shifted way. Yes, he said, slowly, feeling the slow grind of pieces finding each other. You did. Ned's face closed, then opened deliberately. He was not good at having his inner rooms open. His strength lay elsewhere. You asked for counsel once and took it, he said. You might do it again. There are things you say you hate, and you suffer them because your duty says you must. There are other things you say you love, and you toss them off because ease is easier. I will say this, you have children you have not claimed, and you have sons you do not have the making of. Consider what it would mean to make a thing, just once, with long hands and patience. He looked at the stone mouth that would never finish any of the words it had left half-considered. I cannot bear to speak of her down here any more tonight. Robert swallowed something that had not been chewed. You're asking me to do hard work, he said. Yes, Ned said. Yes, Robert. I am. He did not look at the stone anymore. He looked at the living man, and that made the cold easier to stand. When they climbed, Robert's breath had a different sound. The hall gave him back warmth like a reprieve, and he took it and made a show of it, calling for more drink and for a song so filthy that the piper stuttered and Lady Stark's mouth went tight as a seam. He laughed and laughed. He drank and then ate and then drank. He made a show of it, and after a while the show fitted to the man as it always had. The tension behind his eyes turned to heat in his limbs. He was kinder to servants than kings usually were and ruder to his equals than politeness required. What he could not do was make the queen forget that he had gone away with Ned to the dark. She watched him with a precise envy she would never name. She wanted a private dark with certainties in it. She did not have one. She had mirrors and sums and knives. Before the candles had to be surrendered, Robert rose again and leaned over Ned with the familiarity of a man who had no notion of appropriate distances. Tomorrow, he said, breath round with wine and affection. Tomorrow in daylight on your God's ground, say the thing to me that you just said. I will take it easier with the sun on me. You are better at decisions in daylight, Ned agreed, and we'll have eaten. Always a danger when we two are together, Robert said like a man who had evaded a blow only to have it tap his shoulder and remind him he had gotten lucky. We grow into our appetite until nothing else fits in us. He leaned again. Bring the boy. Ned's pulse stuttered. Which boy? He said. But that was a foolishness, and they both let it pass. The night thinned. The prince went to his bed in the sullen glare of someone who has found that the North is less impressed with titles than he imagined. The queen withdrew with the quiet of a blade slipping back into its sheath. Jaime Lannister found a woman to laugh at him and at himself with him, and when she failed to laugh at the right moment, he made up the difference. Tyrion, pockets clinking, attended one of the grooms in teaching him how to cheat in a game involving bones. Lady Stark counted the stores again in her head and then gave herself permission to count her children's faces, and attempted for the 1,000th time to put the two tall boys on equal shelves of her heart. She could not. She had always mistrusted tidiness in such matters anyway. Jon slept lightly. He dreamed that he stood at the edge of a wood under snow and that Ghost went into it ahead of him and vanished, and when he went after, the branches closed and the air smelled of iron and roses. He woke with the odd calm that sometimes followed such dreams, a sense that the day would demand a different arrangement of his careful small ways. He went to the yard and worked his body until it answered to him like a good tool. He watched steam rise off horses and off men's hair and listened for what the day said it would be. Robert woke with a head like a drum someone had kept beating after the musicians had left. He did not need a hand to tell him how much he had drunk. The taste at the back of his throat had formed a ledger. He spat into the basin with the kind of contempt a man reserves for himself at his worst moments. Then he laughed at himself because it had probably been a very good laugh. He put his hands on the table and pushed himself up and found that the table was old and patient and did not resent being leaned on. He grunted, shrugged into fur and into the skin of the man who had always done the larger thing rather than the right one, and went to find the gods. He went alone, not entirely. There are always shadows that think they are doing their job best when they are invisible. But he went without the company his office tried to stick to him. The godswood at Winterfell was an argument he had never learned to answer, and he respected it. It was better to go to such places without a choir. The snow that had teased yesterday had fallen in the night. Not much, a skin of it, but enough to make every footprint matter. Water ran under white crust like thought under a calm face. The tree stood and watched. It had a mouth where a face ought to have been and eyes that had red trickles under them like a butcher's work. Robert had never liked the way these trees looked at him. He wasn't afraid. He just disliked it, which is a different thing and sometimes more unsettling. He went anyway. When he came to the bank, he found that he was not the first. The boy was there. Not Rob. Not the one with the ribbons. The boy with the wolf. The creature lay like something carved from a different idea of snow. The boy stood with his hands loosely at his sides, looking at nothing you could point to and say, that is it. Robert felt something old, some rope that had frayed, tug once more. "You've got a colder blood than I do," he said. His voice seemed to go out and come back muffled by the white. "I have a warmer cloak," the boy said without much emphasis. He turned to face the man who spoke to him, and he did not widen his eyes or duck his head until he knew who it was. When he knew, he did not bow deeply or knock his knee against anything or speak too quickly. He merely tilted his head a measure. Ghost's eyes opened, and he regarded the king as if kings were a category of animal one keeps at a distance out of courtesy. "You are the bastard," Robert said, not to wound. The word in his mouth did not feel the same as when others used it. The boy accepted it as a fact one proceeds from rather than a label that fixes anything in place. "I am John," he said. "Snow here." "Here," Robert echoed. He rubbed his hands together. "Your father hides you less well than he thinks he does. The yard made room for you yesterday without meaning to. A yard knows who belongs in it." John half smiled. "I belong only where I can do my work without tripping anyone." "That's one kind of belonging," Robert said, amused. It would be like Ned to have raised him so that humility was a tool, not a costume. "You are going to the wall." "Yes," John said quietly. He looked at the tree and then at the water and then at the man. "Unless there's a better thing I could be doing." "What would that be?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know yet," John said. "Sometimes you can only see the better thing once you've made yourself into the person who can be given it. The wall is one way to do that. Father says..." He stopped. "Your father says very little when it comes to you," Robert said, and his voice had thickened. "He says so little that even a fool like me hears the unsaid in it." He took in the boy, the paleness that wasn't softness, the dark hair that did not shine but had weight, the eyes that reminded him of snowmelt water. He had known Ned a long time. He had known Ned as a boy who could hold more than one oath in him without letting them quarrel. He had seen him compromise himself only in the way a man does when he refuses to betray something larger. He had seen him do a hard kindness once that had looked like a cruelty to others, bring home a child that made his lady's face colder and keep that child anyway, not as an indulgence but as a law. "What do you want?" Robert asked abruptly. The boy blinked. He looked startled, not by the question but by being permitted to answer it. He took time. The cold made that feel less like hesitation and more like a necessary economy of motion. "I want to be useful," John said at last. "To be worth what I cost." Robert laughed once with genuine pleasure. "Ned did raise you," he said. "He polished you with the north until the shine is hidden under the good roughness." He took a step closer. Snow shivered beneath his heel and the water's talk altered a tone. "I have sons," he went on, "and daughters. I am not the father you have. I am not even the father they have. But they are mine in ways that will matter to the world, and that means what they are will matter to me whether I drink enough to postpone thinking about it or not." My sons. He stopped and made himself go on, and it felt to Jon as if he was watching a man pick up a thing too heavy and then keep lifting. I have left pieces of myself in places that would make my mother weep were she free to do it. All those pieces, dark-haired boys and some girls as well, no doubt, who know how to ask for coin when a man smiles and how to be proud of nothing, have one thing in common. They look like me. He rapped his knuckles against his own skull. This ridiculous black thatched roof. Jon looked at him without indicating he thought this a jest. Your sons here do not. Robert's mouth curved painfully. You see, he said, almost with gratitude, I prefer it when I am not the one to say it first. But I am a coward sometimes where I shouldn't be, and a fool always where I should not. And there it is. I care nothing for Heir except when I remember that those small ones in the streets, the ones named for the handful of coin I threw at their mother from a saddle, are copies. Copies of a thing I did not care over much to be. I ought to have thought it balm that these with titles have their mother's gold. It does not balm me. He moved like a big animal irritated by a burr in a place he could not reach. I am a king. I can make words into law. I can make a boy into a man on paper. I can give a piece of myself to someone who is not of me and say that he is. Men have done worse. They have done stranger. They have done it because they wished to and because it served them. Jon's face did not change. A man unused to reading him would have said he was silent. Robert saw the rush of thought like fish under ice. Why would you do that? Jon said after a time, not shapelessly but with care. Because I cannot imagine leaving what I have built in the hands of. He was honest enough to catch the unkindness before he completed it. In hands I do not trust. Because your father is the only man I would put my neck under for without counting the cost first. Because a boy who can say he wishes to be useful is already on a road that does not end in a small man in an expensive chair with his hand always full and never with a sword in it. Because I have been thinking about what it would be to do one thing in my life that had patience in it. And because I am tired, Robert said, and he had not meant to say that last aloud, came out with steam and made his breath short. Tired of being surprised by my own ease. Jon looked at the tree. If you set your name to something, he said, it will matter, not just to me. It will make the shape of everything differently in this castle and far beyond. Lady. He stopped there as if the stone of the name in his mouth was too weighty to push past his teeth. My lady will not be eased by it. My brother, he will be generous because generosity is in him, but it will strike him hard. Your queen will. Your tongue is nimble in matters of others' feelings, Robert said, and this time his laugh had no cruelty in it at all. Good. It is a kind of caution I have rarely bothered with. He rocked back on his heels. And yet, there is the matter of the realm. I will not live long enough to reorganize it by slow degrees with a fine hand. I have swung hammers. This would be a hammer. And hammers break things you might have wished to keep if you thought about keeping them. But sometimes you must strike. Jon nodded. I am no one, he said calmly. I have learned to live with the fact of it. The wall seems a good place for such men. Right now this makes a shape that I can hold in my head. To change it seems like becoming someone else. You ask what I want. I answer it cold simple. But I do not know what I would want if I had your name, or one you gave me. I suspect I would continue wanting to be worth what I cost. But the price would be higher. You are your father's, Robert said, and the ache in his chest moved like a man shifting on a stool that had one short leg. You are your father's in the best ways. He paid dear many years ago, and he has been paying since and gouging no one for change. Ghost stood and made no sound, but the muscles under his coat flowed like water. He stepped forward until his shoulder brushed Jon's knee and then stood and looked at the king and showed his teeth politely. Robert found himself grinning back at the animal, unexpectedly happy to be considered by something that did not care that he was a king. He spread his hands. I will do it, he said. The words surprised him by their simplicity once out. I will not talk it to death before it is born. I will not ask 6 councils for permission to be the man I must be. I have long used my will for meat and noise and the stopping up of emptiness. Let it do something built for cold. He expected protest. He got the measured seriousness in Jon's face that he had secretly hoped for. "If you do it," Jon said, do not then go back. People will hate you for it. They will smile and hate you, and they will gather their close things like hens under a hedge, and they will make new arithmetic. Some will pretend you did nothing. Some will pretend you did a different thing. Some will pretend you showed yourself weak where you have been strong. If you do it, do not let them teach you to be sorry, or it will ruin more than it will mend. It was a very careful thing to say to a king. Robert savored that. He had been fed so many bluntnesses and so many flattery slices that this felt like one of those foods, northern perhaps, that are both simple and impossible to make if you haven't stood in the smoke for years learning how. He nodded finally. "I will want your counsel," Robert said, and the ridiculousness of saying so to a boy did not sting him as it might another man. He meant it in some way deeper than the straightforward sense. "Not yet. I will want your eyes and your ability to keep your mouth shut about your own feelings when another man's must be managed first." "You will do." "I am good at silence," Jon said. The tree made a sound then. No, the wind dragged a sound out of it. And for a moment they both looked up at the carved face that watched, old as frost. They were found there by Ned, who came with his mouth set because he'd made it be set so. He looked from the boy to the man and then to the tree and then back to the man because the boy's face gave nothing away and the tree's gave less. Robert's eyes had the look they took on when he had decided something that felt like a story he might be able to tell himself in comfort later. Ned's body knew that look, and his stomach did something small and unpleasant. "Good," the king said, as if Ned had answered a question. "Save me from your queen and mine. Or at least teach me your trick for not minding their gaze." "I have no such trick," Ned said. "You marry the right woman if your aim is to be scoured clean," Robert went on. "If your aim is to never have an easy day unexamined." He clapped Ned's shoulder. "You married the right woman. I married the right family. We have each our fate." There was a pause that could have had anything in it, and Ned, who would not waste such a pause, filled it with the necessary thing. "If you are set on what you spoke of last night," he said, a strain pushing against his restraint, "know that you will bring a storm to my house." "I bring storms whenever I walk," Robert said cheerfully. "The point is to leave rain when I'm gone and not just smashed roofs." Ned did not smile. "Do it carefully," he said. "Do it in writing. Do it with witnesses who cannot be made to forget their own faces. If you do it in a rush with wine in you, it will be as nothing in a month but an anecdote told by men who like to imagine they were there." "Ah," Robert said. "You and the boy, patience and paper. Fine. Find your maester. I will find the hand that holds my seal and give it something to hold that matters." It was a very simple thing to say. Saying it made the day tilt. Ned imagined Caitlyn's mouth when he told her. He imagined Rob's. He imagined the boy's face, and then forced himself to do the harder thing and imagined the boy's feelings after 3 days, after 3 weeks, after 3 months of having every eye judge him for how well he carried something he had not asked for. Hard things were easy to imagine in the Godswood. The air sharpened men. They went in. The change from that cold to the corridors felt rude. They walked in a pattern that presence and duty laid down before them. Maester Luwin came at once, small and precise, his chain a quiet conversation piece, hands already itching for parchment. He saw the arrangement of faces and paled. Then, because he had never been able to refuse the thrill of the exact tool being requested for the exact task, his fingers steadied. "Parchment, ink," Robert said, as if calling for bread, and something in Lady Stark tightened from 3 chambers away. Words, not pretty ones, strong ones, and witnesses, this man and that little one with the clever tongue, and the big brother with the white cloak if he deigns to watch a king right, and any 3 who keep the kitchen from falling apart because those are the true witnesses to what is real. "Bring them." Luwin blinked precisely thrice. "Your Grace," he said, if it is to set aside one succession and lay another down, you understand that there are laws that look at such acts with the expression my wife wears," Robert said. "Yes, write it as if it will have to be read by men who hate it and by men who pretend they do not understand anything unless it is in the old forms." Write it as if I had asked you to sell me a chest with iron bands rather than a poem. Write it so that when it is read with the sunrise in 10 years, it still sounds like the exact thing I mean." Luwin bowed his head. He had been waiting for such a job his whole long apprenticeship at Lives. He vanished and returned in the way that men like him have of seeming to do two parts of a thing at once. He laid out the material and the table accepted it. Robert flexed his hand twice as if reminding himself what it had been for before it held cups and breasts and hammers. The lines came out not cleanly. He was too impatient to be pretty with ink. They came out ruggedly and with strength, and Luwin, seeing this, adjusted his own hand so that his annotations and clarities did not offend the way the king's strokes wanted to make their case. Words like acknowledge and legitimate carried a weight heavier than their thin letters promised. Luwin, who loved words, felt even as he wrote a faint grief at the way they would shake men's houses. Ned stood and did what he had always thought of as bearing. He bore his love for his son and his fear for his son and his trouble at the way the world would look at the other son he had, who had been first and would now be second, and he did not let any of that spill into the basin. He did not breathe hard. He only put his hand on the back of the chair a fraction more firmly than before. John stood near the door as if he were a messenger who might be required to run and would not get in anyone's way until then. Ghost lay outside in the corridor and refused to come in because the smell of scraped iron on ink put his hackles up. The boy with the clever tongue came when he was sent for. He looked at the table and then at the faces and then at the wolf in the hall and then at the ceiling as if something interesting had been etched there. The big brother in white came to the doorway, looked, and then did not come in. That was its own declaration. The queen did not come. That had a different kind of weight. When it was done, there was a heat in the room out of keeping with the weather. Luwin sanded and shook and blew. The king let his hand rest on what he had made. He did not yet look at Ned because he knew that the face he would meet would be too honest to allow him to pretend he had done the thing cleanly. He sat back and the chair made a sound that was both relief and warning. "You will make enemies," Ned said in a voice not meant to prove anything to anyone. "Some of them new, some of them older than you think. You always have. But these will teach their grandchildren to hate your name and to smile when they do it." "I will make what I have always made," Robert said. "A road. Let them walk it with sour faces if they like. I have chosen what I can bear." John said nothing. Even in silence men sometimes speak, and his silence had room in it for gratitude and dread and a type of resolve that felt like he had been bracing for it all his life without knowing he would ever need it. He watched the maester roll and tie and seal, and the red wax took the impression like a skin that has been asked to accept a tattoo and would now carry the mark into winter after winter. Before the word leapt from paper to air, Lady Stark arrived as if something in her bones had rung a bell. She did not cross the threshold, but she stood at it and the space folded back to let her through at least that far. Her face had never been designed to be a plea. It was a structure that held. Now it had to hold more than it had been asked to before. She looked at Ned first because he was the thing that moved between her and every question the world asked of her. Her eyes said his name as they always did. Not chiding, not decorated, steady. "What have you done?" she asked, and because she spoke to her husband, she did not make it sound like an accusation. She needed only to know what tools to take down from the shelf. Ned took a breath as if he had to fight to find it. "What kings do," he said. "He has made a word into a shape that will stand up to men pushing." "About the boy," she said. It was not a question. Ned nodded. The queen might have screamed or wept or woven something with the sound for later use. The Lady of Winterfell did a thing that was both softer and harder. She glanced toward John and then back, and the glance acknowledged a life she had tried for years to keep from interfering with the one she had been growing. She did not dislike the boy anymore. That had gone out of her like winter fever, leaving behind weakness the might of which she had not expected. She knew that now she would have to dislike what the boy would make happen. It was not the same thing. It was a smaller and meaner sorrow. She took it into herself like a draught of something bitter that would do good later. "The message will go south," she said, "and men will make arithmetic over it. And north," Ned said. "It will go to every corner of our lives." Robert watched her and remembered that not all steel lived in swords. He could not ask her for permission. He did not have it in him to apologize where he believed he had finally done a right thing. He did the other thing he knew how to do when he had made pain. He reached in an abrupt way toward comfort. "You have raised stronger boys than you know," he said gruffly. "Strong is what is needed where we are going." It was a foolish comfort, but it had the virtue of being true. Caitlin looked at him with a gaze properly meant for the winter sky and all the time that would pour from it. Her mouth softened. "See that it is worth what it costs," she said. "I mean for the realm. I mean for my house. I mean for that boy. I will keep bread on his table until the last loaf, but I cannot bake him safeties. If you put him where knives are cleaned rather than shelved, see that you keep men with good cloths around him." Robert did not answer that with words. He nodded once, and it was like a promise taken. He had made many promises in his life, and this one felt different because he had the first clear fright he'd had in years about whether he could keep it. The fear sobered him in a way all the maesters in the realm with pots of boiled herbs had failed to. The ink dried. Lewin's hands were careful with the bright cord. The wax went dull and hard and held the impression like a frozen pond holds a thrown rock under the first skin of winter. The witnesses each put their name, or their mark that stood as their name, and the room breathed again as if only then it was permitted to believe that the act had happened. News has its own legs. It walked differently in different halls. In the Queen's chamber, it arrived and made the mirror crack inside her without any glass showing the break. She sat with her women and had a stitch in her hand, and it pulled wrong and made a row that would have to be unpicked later. She did not change her face. In the white-cloaked brother's stomach it sat with a familiar sourness. He would continue to do well the hard thing his honor asked, and part of him would relish the difficulty as a test. In the hall below, where men oiled spears and tightened belts, it came as a story half heard, half guessed, and the story, the one that would become something carried by gossips like a tray, said the king had put his hand on a boy's head and promised him not a castle but the whole world that contains castles. In the prince's ear it arrived like a joke told by a man he did not like. The laugh he made hurt the man more for its effort. In the yard, where John had learned to place his feet so that he would always have a place to put his weight, it arrived in the space between breaths. He went back there, to the yard, because one goes first to the last place a thing made sense. He found Rob there, predictably. The two boys looked at each other, and then Rob did the single best thing he could have done. He walked forward and put his hand against John's neck in a way that said more than any words could have managed. Then he took it away, embarrassed by how much there was in him. "I don't know what to say," Rob confessed, and the confession was a relief, because John feared now most of all those who did not admit not knowing what to say. "Say that the ice is good today," John said dryly. "Say that if we take the wooden blades now they will smart, and that will be better for us later than if they did not. Say that when we were little and my knife was dulled and yours sharp you switched them when you thought I didn't see and I saw and didn't say anything, and that this is not so different." Rob swallowed. "That was a long time ago," he said gruffly. "It's always now in the north," John said. "That's what it feels like." He believed that and did not yet know how it would adapt to the strange fact that his name might cross the neck like a banner. Theon came, and he wore a face that had been arranged not to show envy. He arranged it badly. He took in the two boys and their name shifts, and he took in the edges of the yard, and he took in the great new slope of things, and smiled with a sharpness that wounded him first. "Well," he said, "well, some of us come up out of nowhere to find crowns falling on our heads. Some of us have crowns taken off while we sleep. It's a busy world." "Don't be a fool," Rob said. It was both a plea and a scolding. "I don't know how to be anything else," Theon answered with a little bow. He could not stop himself. He was not as cruel as he pretended to be, and not as kind as he could have been, and he kept both facts alive in him by speaking too quickly. He drifted away before he would have to say something that would later demand apology. Tyrion stood where he had no business standing and made no apology for it. He had an eye for new architecture, and this was a new palace being raised in a moment with words as beams and nails. "Your Grace," he said to John with a tiny flick of irony that was not unkind. "No, that's not yet, is it? Names are awkward in their adolescence. they trip on their own feet. The trick is to not let them make you do the same. I have always tripped, Jon said. I have practice. Yes, Tyrion said softly. I imagine you do. He tipped his head. You will find the view from up there is clearer. And the wind is harder. Try not to let it scour all your skin off. Jon nodded. There were 1,000 responses to every remark, and he was grateful he had thought of one that did not make him feel like a puppet. He turned away and lifted a practice sword because he had to put his weight somewhere. Robb raised one in answer. Their play had new observation attached to it now. The watching men, their faces careful not to stare, could not help themselves. Jon felt the attention like heat on his neck and ignored it because that skill had been trained into him as a muscle. He moved. The swing met Robb's, and the clatter was a comfort because some noises do not change even when names do. He fought and thought and made himself smaller inside so that the shape of him could be carried by the larger new thing without splitting. He fought and saw his brother's face, dearer for some reason and also more painfully placed in the new map of things. He fought and thought of the wall and how suddenly he might not be going there, and hated himself for the tiny coil of relief that warmed even as the grief for it cooled. He fought and thought of a queen's look and of boys who scowled at torches and of wolves that refused rooms where ink had been spilled. When they laughed, breathless, their blades crossed and making a neat X between their true faces and the world. The sound carried across the yard like a declaration that children would insist on making because to not declare it would be to tell a lie in the presence of their own hearts. Men in corners pretended not to hear and did. In the small council in his own mind, Robert sat and poured drink for himself and then set the cup aside. He was not a good man for long plans. He had found in his life 1,000 reasons to let the hammer swing in hand and call that decision enough. He had never once thought of legacy in a way that wasn't about songs. Now he thought about ink and parchment and boys with old eyes. He thought about Cersei's mouth in a moment when she forgot to smile. He thought about Ned's strange mercy. He thought about a girl with a crown of flowers in the south with a mouth as fierce as winter. He thought about the one honest thing he could still do and the price of it, in friends and in gold and in blood. He was not good enough to rise without groaning. He was good enough to go secretly to the window and look out at the yard where the boy was making himself into something no word on paper could do for him. He saw Robb go down and roll and rise and laugh up at Jon and push his hair out of his eyes, and he felt, not for the first time, the ache at having no son who laughed at him like that because love was not the thing that had been invited into his children's rooms by their mother. Joffrey would always take the joke as an insult. Tommen would always try to fix the joke into something polite. Myrcella would always be the one who understood but pretended not to for peace. He loved them in the way a man loves a house he has inherited and cannot modify, even as the roof leaks and the windows stick. He thought of all the black-haired boys who had his cheekbones and his height and made a sigh in alleys when men had passed and said the king had ridden by. He thought of the one boy who would now bear the cost of what he had failed to be. He did not decide to be better. Men who did that at his age were liars. He decided to be exactly this thing for once with clear eyes and to let that be enough. In the queen's chamber, the unpicking began at once. She took the stitch out of the row and the stitch below it and the one below that, and soon she had half her work in her lap and the other half on the bed. She put it aside and walked to the mirror and studied the face there and then made it pleasant. When she went to speak to her father's man by the fire, she did not speak of outrage. A cheap currency she did not spend on servants or friends. Instead, she asked questions about timing and messengers and precedent. She asked where the chain on the maester's neck had come from and whether any of its links could be made to turn more slowly. She asked about the prince's tutors and which ones could be dismissed without making it look like dismissal. Each question was a thread in a web that had taken many years to teach her fingers. She would not panic. She would not confront directly. She would not break the web by flinging herself at it. Her twin came and stood where mirrors could see both their faces. "He has decided," he said, as if reporting the behavior of a man who had always done exactly this. "He cannot decide," she said, and kept her tone light as if they were speaking of a dress. "He can only pretend to it and let us put it right again later." "You are very sure," he said. "I am sure of myself. she answered, and accepted the kiss on the cheek he gave her for what it was. A promise only he could break. In the god's wood, footprints were being filled with the thin, fine crumble of new snow. The tree watched with the impartiality of a witness for whom human schemes are one season among many. The red in its eyes did not dim or brighten. It simply existed, more permanent than the people who brought their vows under it and then went away to meet consequences. A raven landed briefly on a branch and put its head to the side and then made a low conversational sound to the other two who had followed it. They talked. They were not misers with their opinions. A boy went to his father. They stood in a room where the fire had burned long enough to have manners. The father looked at the boy as if he had brought home a blade he had not asked for and would keep anyway. The boy did not pretend he had not done it. He stood and allowed himself, for the first time in many years, to ask to be held. He did not say it. He simply moved, and the man who had not failed him did the thing men like him do best. He made place. He put his hand on his son's head as if that son's hair had been his to smooth since the beginning. And Jon let his eyes shut because when there are storms, men of sense go for a time under the eaves. "Stay steady," Ned said into the hair that smelled of cold. "Do not be unworthy of what you cannot be blamed for." "I won't," Jon said. "I don't think I can be other than as I am." "That is what keeps me calm," Ned said. He released him. "That and the fact that I know the man who has made this mischief loves you. Even if he does not know which of the loves in him it is he offers." "I do not need him to love me," Jon said. Then he added, because something in this new arrangement wanted honesty from him in places he would formerly have spared himself. "But it eases me that he does." "Of course it does," Ned said. He did not say that the first thing in Jon's life that had ever seemed easy sat uncomfortably on him. He did not say that he himself had known few easeful things and did not trust them when they arrived. He said, "Be cautious, and be brave, and be kinder than this will teach you to be." It was all the advice he had, and it would have to do. The day wore to its edges, and no one slept at the hour they usually would. Servants whispered in the places where kitchens go dull and the embers of the day are pushed together. Men in the yard went on practicing beyond the moment when their little skills had gone faint, and now they were only making fatigue. High in the tower, a queen traced in her mind the path a message would take to her father and the response it would bring. And in the king's room, the man whose seal burned red on curves of wax lay on his side with his eyes open and remembered being young and not thinking he would ever need to know how to be old. Near dawn, the cold deepened, always the last revenge of night before it gives way. Robert rose and dressed as if he could not afford to have his joints know what he intended. He went out alone again. He wanted to put himself where the earth was older than all his hungers. The god's wood was the same wood it had been, but now it felt different because he had printed himself onto it in a way he could not rub away by laughter. He went where the water ran and told it nothing. He stood and did not ask for comfort, and the lack of it was its own sort of clean. When he turned at last, he found that once more he was not the first. The boy had walked there ahead of him, and the white wolf had left prints like a line of folded bone. Jon turned and saw him and did not step forward quickly or back as if to flee. He lifted his chin, a small thing and a large thing. "I will not fail you," he said, though no one had asked him yet for such an oath. Robert nodded. "See that you do not fail yourself," he answered, because he was trying this morning to speak like the man he had always wanted to fear and never could. They went in together and the day began again, and everything looked as it had the day before except that someone had taken the world and put their hand in its middle and pressed down. The shape was altered. Some cracks had appeared that would be mended in ways that would never make the surface smooth again. Some paths had been interrupted and would require detours. Some eyes would see the alteration and adjust themselves. Others would refuse and be offended at having to step around the place where the world had been forced into a new truth. There would be messages and counsels and rebukes and offers disguised as rebukes. There would be a queen who would move as if across ice with a lamp in her hand, drawing men's reflections after her as if they were fish. There would be a boy who had expected to say vows in black and would instead be asked to say others that had no color he could name. There would be a lord who would have to teach his lady that what he had kept alive all these years was not a betrayal of her, but the most difficult fidelity to a promise he had made a girl who now had no use for promises. There would be a wolf who would not be parted from the boy even when men with too much braid on their sleeves would insist dogs had no place in certain rooms. There would be a north that watche as it always had, with silence that might be judgment or wisdom or both. But for that hour near dawn, there were only two men and a tree and the breath of water. Robert breathed. John breathed. The north held them with the same indifferent strength with which it held the dead. The light thinned to the gray that is kinder than black. And somewhere far away down a road that was now, at last, beginning to lead elsewhere, a raven shook out its wings and considered a long flight with messages under each feather. The day gathered itself around a purpose the way a man draws a cloak tight when wind sharpens. Word had moved in the unseen paths it always used, between pillars through servants' mouths, along the backs of benches, in the steam from the kettles where cooks told each other what their masters had not yet decided to say. Winterfell had been a place of long certainties for so long that even rumor had learned to move softly. Today it had boots on. They crowded the hall because Winterfell was a house and houses hold their breath when a new beam is raised. They crowded because kingship was a rare weather and northerners, sensible as they were, liked to feel what the South thought of itself. They crowded because the words would matter to them even if the words were about southern things. Men who had never been much interested in parchments with seals tried to think through how such a thing could reach from one man's hand to theirs, and whether it would help or harm their stores. The high table waited. The king did not come late and had never learned how to come humbly. He came with the crest of fatigue on his face and a brightness under it that had not been there yesterday. The queen took her place and made the wood beneath her seem lacquered and thinner than it was. Joffrey sat like a knife in an ornamental sheath, the boy's gaze flashing to every corner where eyes might be delayed in their reverence. Myrcella's composure was the one that would grow into the better kind if she was allowed. Tommen's hands were already sticky with honey he hadn't eaten yet. The white cloak gleamed faintly where winter light found it. The small man's chair was too large for him. He improved it by looking as if chair and man had made a compact. Ned stood because he was a man who did not ask other men to do hard things that he would not also stand for. Lady Stark's seat was half-turned, as if she was at once attending and watching the door for whatever new necessity might run through it. The Stark children were arranged by age and expectation. Jon stood behind and to the side with Luwin in that place where usefulness waits. The dire wolves were absent save Ghost, who lay just beyond the hall in a wedge of shade and watched the feet of men pass as if reading fortunes in their gait. When the sounds had rattled themselves into quiet, the king made a gesture that would have been dismissive if it had not also been a request. Maester Luwin moved forward into a pool of thinner light and unrolled the thing that had made itself in yesterday's air. The parchment had already taken on some of the hall's breath. It lay with the amenable weight of something that has become a fact. Luwin cleared his throat. It was not a theatrical cough, and yet men heard it as a bell. His voice was small and very sure. He read. He read the king's names and the names he had taken that kings before him had taken for themselves as if men were amulets hung around their own necks. He read the words that said acknowledge. He read the words that said legitimate. He read the words that were more dangerous than either of those, heir and succession and with all rights and dignities appertaining thereto, in perpetuity, save revocation by the grace and will of the king. He read the names of witnesses who could not be compelled to have been elsewhere. Ned Stark, Tyrion Lannister, 3 of Winterfell's senior servants whose hands smelled of flour and lye and old iron, and 1 knight of the Kingsguard who did not write his name in the room and whose absence was therefore its own kind of signature. Luwin finished and silence took a long breath. In it, the king's seal glowed a dull, congealed red, a drop of blood that had learned law. Some sounds now came. A bench leg dragged, a man coughed, a woman murmured to a child. Then Robert stood. His voice was simpler than the parchment. It had a long history of calling for cups and for the next story and for a charge. It had almost no habit of persuasion and none for apology. When he spoke now, men understood that he had borrowed a kind of patience from his friend and from the tree whose eyes bled sap, and brought it down here to blow heat on a handful of snow. A king chooses, he said, Sometimes he chooses meat over fish. Sometimes he chooses to listen to the man who tells him the truth rather than the one who can sing. Sometimes he chooses to put his name where it will make trouble for his enemies and comfort for his friends. I am not good at the choosing that makes no sound at the time and only a great sound later. This is a large sound now, and it will echo. Let it go south and be argued over in rooms with rugs and wine that costs too much. Let it go north where men will weigh it against bread and find it fair enough because it was spoken plainly. I have been blessed with sons and daughters, he said, and let the words sit in the hall until men could taste where he wanted them to carry their tongues next. Some are mine by law, some are mine by blood, some are mine because I say they are, and my word is stone until I make it water. This one I say is mine. This one I say will follow me, if the gods are cruel enough to have me die before him. If they are kinder and let me outlast him or change my mind, that is their gift to me and my sorrow. For now, hear me, Winterfell. Hear me, North. Hear me, any man who draws pay from me and any man who dreads to. This boy is mine. This boy is my heir. He did not point. He did not call Jon forward. He did not make a moment of spectacle that would have crushed the boy under it. He let the room find the boy the way men find the true ridge in fog, because that is the only place their weight will not throw them. Eyes moved and settled. Jon felt them come and settle, and he did not flinch. He did not smile. He did not bow a deep theatrical bow. He lifted his chin a half-inch, and that small movement was seen and remembered. Cersei's hands were in her lap. The knuckles were not white. She had learned long ago which muscles gave a woman away to those who wished to see it. She thought of her father with his long patience and his long memory, and she thought of the boy at her side and the way he had once, as a child, buried his face in the upholstery of a chair because he did not want to look at a dog. She thought of her brother and of secrets with edges. She let her mouth arrange itself. She looked at the king with a look that would not cut him now. There are knives that only do their work when the meat has cooled. Joffrey drew himself up like a rope being yanked. There was a jerk to it. The hound behind him did not move or lower his eyes, but the slant of his scar altered. Tommen looked uncertainly from face to face and then tried to adopt his sister's poise. He managed only to stop moving. Myrcella, who was kind by inclination and clever enough to hide it, put a hand on her brother's sleeve to remind him that their family did not rearrange itself in public. The hall breathed. Men who had believed they had known whom to fear and whom to flatter tried to reorder the shelf where they kept those jars. Lord Wyman Manderly's mouth did something small and interested and cautious, as a man's does when he hears that a new merchant has arrived with a supply from far cities. The Umbers were pleased to have something to thump their cups about. They thumped. Lady Meage Mormont smiled very slightly and looked at Jon as if measuring his wrists. Rosalind Poole blinked, lifted her chin, and went on keeping her ledger in her head in case anyone decided that today was a day to make trouble in the stores. Cook Kay swore under her breath because she had already made the day's bread count, and now perhaps 8 more mouths would appear for the next meal without notice because news makes men hungry. Ned stood and thought for a discernible instant that he might be sick. His face did not show it. He had expected to be asked to say something, and so he was not surprised when the king turned toward him with that abashed demand for corroboration that men like Robert were always issuing after they had done something they knew would rattle a house. Ned did not speak many words. He said the necessary ones. "My king has put his name to it," he said. "I will put mine to what comes of it. While he holds breath, I will advise him. When he is gone, if this word stands then, the boy will have my house. He will have the north at his back if he earns it." He did not say, "I will teach him to earn it." He did not say, "and I will cut him if he fails." Men heard it anyway. "For today," he said, and he made himself say it because men in rooms full of witnesses must seal things with phrases. "Jon, son of Jon of Winterfell, the king's heir, will dine at my table." Somewhere in the room there was a soft intake of breath from a woman who had spent her married life finding new ways to share and never getting used to it. Catelyn did not look down. She did not touch the ribbon at her wrist. She did not search for the priest who would have told her that now, at last, she was being asked to be gracious in earnest. She kept the floor. Sansa's world. carefully arranged by stories and scents, and the color of light on hair like coins, trembled like a dew-beaded web. Her mouth opened a fraction and closed. Princes were supposed to be golden. That was what songs told her, because songs reflected back what women demanded of them. But sometimes princes in songs appeared out of woods with dark hair and wolves at their heels. She did not know where to set this new knowledge. She looked at Joffrey. He did not look at her because his reflection had suddenly become less interesting. She looked at Jon. He didn't look at her either, which was both a relief and an affront. She arranged her hands as Septa Mordain had taught her, so that they seemed composed and felt empty. Arya did not arrange anything. She stood forward on her toes and said yes. Not to any person but to the heir. She did not know what she meant. She meant that the world could still surprise her in a way that set a spark to tinder rather than pouring water on it. She meant that perhaps the South would not be allowed to crust over everything with gold leaf. She meant that Jon would not go 1,000 miles away into cold she could not imagine and become something that would only exist as a letter twice a year and a story when old men were done with theirs. She meant that a wolf she loved would have rooms where she could find him and harry him and be harried by him in return. She felt tears jump into her throat and blew them back down like a child driving a feather across a table. Nymeria, asleep in a rush-strewn alcove with one eye open, twitched in sympathy with her girl's lungs. When the voices got up again, they did so loudly, in a way that pretended to be about meat and bread and the next cask to be broached. Men always pretend a thing is ordinary until they have decided among themselves how to feel about it. Luwin set the parchment aside as carefully as if it were a child, then looked down at his own hands as if wondering how he had made them capable of such acts. The king took a cup and swallowed with the ostentation of a man who knows he is being watched for weakness and intends to show it off as his own show. The queen moved when she judged the eye had shifted to others. She glided along the behind of the table like a rumor keeping to the walls. She spoke with Lady Stark as one speaks to a woman at a funeral. Words that mean very little and carry awareness of much. "Your store of grace is larger than most women's," she said with admiration that could be mistaken for sympathy. "I hope it does not run out all at once." There was kindness in it like glass in a cake, impossible to eat without bleeding. Catelyn's mouth did not soften. "My house stands," she said. "It always has." She did not add, "because we brought in strange children and made them safe." She did not add, "and I have learned how to hold the door open and sleep in drafts." The queen smiled as if a point had been scored for both of them. After, when the hall had belched and shifted into the more relaxed pattern of a day that will not fully breathe again until night adds its shade, Robert came and leaned against Ned and said the thing he had promised to ask in the gods would. "Say yes to what I must ask you." Ned did not say immediately the thing he had known for 2 days that he would have to say. It would not be an honor to take a man's heart out of him without giving him a moment's reprieve. He watched the women clearing, the way their arms moved with the repetitive, blessed motions that keep men from imagining they have created the world afresh each morning. He watched Jon negotiate a bench with Ghost at his heel and 2 boys eager to be at his heel as well. He watched Robb and thought of the shape of the boy's future reaching for anything firm enough to grab. "There are knives waiting for me in the capital," he said at last. "Some of them are hung openly on belts. Some of them are tucked in sleeves. There are knives there that do not need steel to cut. I do not like pretending I cannot feel the cut while blood runs into my boot. I will go," he said, "because the other truth was stronger. Because I would not have you stand alone. And because the man you have made my son to be will need me in the South more than in the yard. I will go, and I will curse you at night in rooms that smell of oranges and piss, and I will send you letters with very small words so that you will be forced to read all of them. I will go," he said again, because saying it 3 times helped forge it. Robert made a noise that was not laughter, but would have been if something softer had been there to receive it. "You have always been a better man than I deserve," he said. "I will try to deserve you twice a week." "Try for 3, Ned said. "You have taken on a boy who has lived on less than he should and made his shape around it. He will not break from richness. He will break from carelessness." Robert bowed his heavy head. "I hear you," he said. "It is not often I can convince myself to listen. They were interrupted by Benjen Stark, who moved like a shadow that included a winter's worth of wind. He had the look of a man whose skin had used up its share of soft rooms. He bowed to the king and then looked at his brother and then at the boy who had begun the day with one name and ended it with another resting invisibly on his shoulder. "I thought to collect a recruit," Benjen said with a rough gentleness that he kept for small wild things. "When I go back to the wall." Jon turned at his name with the quickness of someone who had taught himself not to miss scraps. The words in him wanted to come in a rush. He put them in order because of who stood between him and the man in black. "Uncle," he said, "I, the king." "I know what the king has done," Benjen said. There was a wryness in his mouth that had nothing to do with humor. "I know what men who have been boys together will ask of each other. The wall will stand without this one recruit. It has stood without more useful men than you. It will not notice that you do not come. That is both the comfort and the sorrow of it." He looked at Jon in a way that measured gains and losses and refused to tally them aloud. "I am glad for you," he said, and because he was Stark, he did not turn the honest words into something warm with his tone. They remained the truth, and Jon took them like bread. "Will you take a drink before you go?" Robert asked. He meant now, at once. He had learned to mark men he liked and throw liquor at the mark as if it would wash away the dust that would fall on them when they left him. Benjen shook his head. "There's work I can do for you in that frozen place," he said. "I'll leave the South to those with warm blood and more patience for people." He glanced at Jon again in a way that acknowledged what the boy had wanted and what he was now being told he would not have. Jon stepped forward with an instinct he did not name and put his arms around the uncle who had offered him the door to the one place that had made sense when he was no one. Benjen's arms closed around the boy with an ease that startled them both, and the brief embrace had in it the grief of a path not taken and the relief of another being laid out. They separated like men who had made a bargain and would not speak of it. Outside, the day made sun in the thin way northern days do, useful for finding your feet and not for warmth. The princes wanted air and the queen wanted eyes on her eldest. She sent him out with the hound at his back and a lesson to learn. The lesson, presented as a casual walk, was that he must let the north look at him and find him harmless enough not to rouse itself in a way she could not manage yet. Joffrey heard none of that. He heard that he was being sent to parade himself, and he did what boys do best when told to be silent. He sought somewhere else to shout. He found it by the little river that treated the stones with the same patience the gods would water had for men. Sansa walked beside him, careful and glowing and miserable and hopeful all at once. Her hair made a small sun on a day that needed it. Septa Mordain followed them at the distance that made it possible to claim she had been watching all the while if anything went amiss and to deny she had heard anything inconvenient if a mother wrote a letter later. Arya had escaped her own instruction like a fish through a hole in a net, and now she was in the shallow edge of the river with her boots off and her trousers rolled and a stick in her hand and another in the hand of a boy with a butcher's apron smell on him and that cocky light that comes to boys when they find a thing that is theirs, fleeting and free of obligation. "Lady Arya," Septa Mordain called, a warning wrapped in the form of a correction. "Come to the bank. Ladies do not wade. Your sister." She gestured towards Sansa who, faced with the eternal choice between loyalty to family and loyalty to what the world had promised if one behaved, had frozen herself into a posture that could deny any outcome later. "Am teaching him to be a knight," Arya said scandalously. "Hush," she parried with an enthusiasm that made water bark. The boy, Micah, grinned and fainted and retreated and lunged. He was good for a child who had never been told that he must wait his turn in anything. Joffrey's mouth went sideways. "That's a butcher's boy," he said. He said it as one might say that a piece of meat had been badly cut. "He's playing with a Stark." He said the last word as if he'd been asked to chew a rind. "He's playing with me?" Arya returned, making the words light so they would fly and then stick in the right place. "Sansa," she added, "come in. It's cold and quick and it will make your ankles hurt and feel better at once." "Don't," Sansa said in the tone of a girl who imagines being agreed with makes her a woman. You'll get the hound wet." Joffrey did not hear his betrothed. He had drawn himself up, a straight line of indignation and the hunger for a scene. "Do you see?" he said to Sansa as if instructing. "They're insolent. If they'll do this, don't you see, they'll think they see and do anything." He stepped down toward the water as if it had insulted him by existing. The hound breathed and looked at the sky, which was a thing no one could punish him for. "Boy," Joffrey said to Micah, "show me how you hold that stick." He made the word as ugly as he could. "It's a sword," Arya said. "Or it will be." "Show me," Joffrey repeated, "or I'll show you how men behave when they forget who they are." Micah looked to Arya with the quick appeal of a squire who has run beyond his master's sanction. Arya lifted her stick, put herself between, and made a face at Joffrey that was both childish and perfectly fitted to the occasion. "Go away," she said, as if speaking to a dog one does not know that insists on sniffing your bread. That stung, because it echoed, and the hound's soft snort might as well have been laughter. Joffrey pulled steel. He didn't have to. He did it because the feel of a real blade in hand, the weight of it, soothed a part of him that only calmed when something or someone else was uncomfortably aware of it. The hound moved half a pace without moving at all, attention sharpening invisibly. Sansa felt her innards tilt. Septa Mordain took a breath into which she attempted to pour both authority and sugar. "Put it away," Sansa said. She said it because she had learned that she could make him do little things with her voice when she was careful, and because she was very suddenly terrified that this had become a large thing. Joffrey smiled without humor. "I am showing your sister and her friend," he said the last like the rind again, "what a sword is. This is a sword." Arya lifted her stick and, like a child, could not stop herself speaking her thought. "It looks just like a stick," she said. "That did it." He lunged. Micah fell backward in the water with a splash that took laughter with it. Arya swung and Joffrey parried without thinking. He was not untaught. He pressed forward. Arya yielded ground and bit her own lips, and her eyes flamed. Micah scrambled up with water drilling off him and ran because that was the only lesson any man had ever given him for nobles. Run until you find a door that isn't locked. Joffrey turned with a slice that he made deliberately slow so that he could watch fear arrive in someone's face at the pace he chose. The slice cut nothing but river and the air above it because the white blur came from the bank like a word shouted from a mouth that had been patient too long. Ghost did not make a sound until he had Joffrey's sword in his teeth. The clatter the blade made when it left the prince's hand was a kind of song. The wolf's body was all line and salve. He had moved as if water had made muscle. His muzzle closed, not on flesh but on iron. He shook once, the way dogs do when they make an assertion. The sword went into the river. The hound did not draw, because he understood beasts better than men and because the wolf's body language was not killing. He did step forward in a way that would place him between the wolf and the boy if the angle went bad. His eyes went flat in the way of a man who had the muscles to do things he could not undo and did not wish to have to use them. "Ghost," Arya breathed. "A prayer and a thank you and an oh. Get it off me," Joffrey yelled, shattering the shape of the moment. Ghost had not touched him. The prince had fallen back in wet stones and his palm had met an edge and he saw his own blood. Princes are like anyone else at first blood. Their attention goes blind. He scrambled backward in an ungainly crab and gasped like a child too long under bathwater. "You'll be whipped," he snapped at Arya because he could not make himself say what he meant to the wolf. Jon came down the path at a run that had nothing of pageantry in it. He had heard Septa Mordain's voice carry like laundry on a line, and then the sudden silence and then the shout that was pure princeling. He took in what he needed to take in the distance it took to cover the ground. He saw Joffrey's hand bloody and the sword a dark line under the water and Ghost's guard dog stance and Arya's rigid body and Sansa small and bright with fright. He did not think. He put himself between the wolf and the prince because he could. He did it without insult to the wolf and without deference to the prince that would taste bad later in his mouth. He whistled once, low and very soft. Ghost lifted his head. The wolf's mouth was wet. He looked at Jon. Jon lifted his fingers and made a tiny shape with them that meant come away without shame. Ghost came. He did it with the perfect obedience of a creature who respects rather than fears. He stood at Jon's knee, and his red eyes stayed on the boy who had wanted to cut a child with a real sword because a stick had insulted him. "What in the seven hells is this?" Robert's voice asked, not angrily, but in that weary way that says a man knows he will be told and will not like any version of it. He was there because the hound had a way of drawing kings down roads they had not meant to turn into when smoke came from them. He took in the river and the Styx and the sword in water and the wolf and his own heir and his own other heir in a knot that was already tightening. Cersei was not there, but her breath reached like a fan ahead of her. She would be there soon enough with her eyes. "Prince Joffrey," Jon said, plain. "It's cold. Let's see your hand." "You will not touch me," Joffrey spat. "Your dog bit me." Ghost bared his teeth politely again. Robert lifted a hand and let it fall. He was tired. He felt very old. He loved hounds and he hated scenes, and he had given himself a larger thing this morning that had drained the energy that he would otherwise have spent on yelling Joffrey into obedience. He had been a boy with blood running off his hand and pride making a fool of him once. He had been a man with a hangover and a man with a love like a bone in his throat, and this small war at a river with sticks had none of the weight needed to profit from his anger. "It was more than a dog," Arya said, her chin up. "He wouldn't hurt him if he didn't. He was being." "Enough," Robert said. He could not bear the thought of being the kind of king who would train a girl to be careful with her mouth in a lovely little way because it made the world easier to move across. He took a breath and let it out in a chunk. "Joff, your hand." Joffrey held it, awkwardly, like a thing he could no longer claim. Robert looked. The cut was small and dramatic, as if someone had dragged a knife across the skin to make a story. "Wash it," he said shortly. "Sandor." The hound came and took the boy's wrist with a grip that did not care for princely sensibilities and dragged the hand into water. Joffrey gasped at the cold and went white with indignation and shock and a humiliation that would have been comic if it weren't so genuine. Cersei arrived with the quick stride that made people rearrange themselves without remembering they had decided to avoid collision. She saw red on her son's fingers and a white wolf with red eyes and a dark-haired boy standing between, and she put her grief in front of her anger because she had learned that grief draws more allies to your back and anger does nothing but pull men's eyes down to your mouth. "What has been done?" she asked. "What have you allowed?" Robert flinched at aloud. It was an old pain she could always find. "A boy cut himself on a sword," he said. "A wolf took the sword away. That is all." "It is not all," she said, and grief flickered into rage. "A royal prince was attacked by a beast. A Stark put that beast to my son's throat." "Your son put the sword to a child's throat first," Arya said, because no one had trained her to use silence the way other girls had been taught. "He wanted to cut Micah to show off to the water." Cersei did not even look at her. She emptied her eyes of Jon. "I will have the animal killed," she said, "and the child chastised." "You will have neither," Robert said, so softly that the river stopped speaking for a moment to hear it. He did not look at her. He looked at the hound washing Joffrey's hand and at Sansa holding her breath so tightly that her lips had gone white, and at Arya with her stick, and at Jon with his wolf. "No wolf will die for this." She drew breath to shout, and he forestalled her because he did not want to do the other thing he had done so many times. Let her anger fill the space and drain him of his better sense. "You will not teach the North that my word this morning was wind," he said. "We will mend the boy." His tone made clear which boy he meant. "And we will put the sword back in its sheath and the sticks in the woodpile. That is all." She held his gaze because she had learned long ago that sometimes, very rarely, she could burn through his will by the simple application of her own. It did not work today. He looked away first, but not in defeat, more in exhaustion. He had used his day's portion of good kinging this morning with ink, and he could not be compelled to be lavish. Cersei turned then and let the river see her back. "He will be punished," she said to Joffrey in a voice that was his alone. "I promise you this." Joffrey nodded, tears in his eyes at last because the hound had ground sand into the cut and because his mother had promised him something sharp. Sansa wanted to say everything and found herself able to say nothing. Arya wanted to say nothing and found herself throwing words. Later, she would be corrected for both choices. Jon met Robert's eyes for an instant, and the look there said, "Thank you for this single small act of being different today, though I will not believe it means you have become a new man." Robert did not look away. He did not shrug. He just stood and felt the North take his side once, in a thing that mattered only because it had gathered so much else into it. They dispersed because people do. Septa Mordane's voice found itself and hit the notes it knew. "Sansa," she called. "Arya." The names came like keys being put back on hooks. The Hound took Joffrey with the tenderness that only men who have learned very hard lessons about pain can show. Cersei made the walk back to the castle a procession because processions had always been the way she put skin back over herself. Robert lingered because the water and the cold permitted a man to imagine that his choices remained his own a little longer when he stood by them. "Do you think she will try to kill the wolf?" Tyrion asked conversationally from a rock that had not lately held a dwarf. Jon, who had not seen him arrive, did not start, which was the kind of skill that had nothing at all to do with swords and would soon mean more. Not because he did wrong, because it will please the boy to see something die for him. It is a kind of sugar that children of a certain kind crave. "She won't find him," Jon said, hand in ghost scruff. He spoke as if the problem had already been solved. "He knows where to be when men with orders come. Teach your sister's wolves that trick," Tyrion advised. "You'll need it sooner than you think." He was not wrong. He was not right in the way he had meant it, either. The trouble that would come to wolves would not find them because of a small splash and a small cut. It would find them the way all trouble in that house found them, because a boy loved heights and because two people believed the world owed them a better mirror. Bran loved the air when it turned his ears raw. He loved the way the stones of Winterfell's old towers took little bits of him into them, the skin off his fingertips and the confidence in his bones, and made him their own. He did not climb only for pride. He climbed because up there was where everything made sense. Angles and ledges, risks measured and then taken, a view that rewarded him with the sight of men who had forgotten to look up. The castle spoke to him when he was above her. Below, he had to listen to others. He had been told a dozen times not to climb where he did. He had promised. He had thought of the promise and then put it down in a box that he would later insist he had not opened. He climbed anyway, with his hand on the notch of his favorite route, with his foot pressing a familiar crumbly lip, with his body stretching in the rhythm he had taught it since he was a little boy with a heart too light to carry itself on flat ground. He found the ledge he wanted and the window beyond it. A half-ruined part of the old keep where rooms had become shells and shells had become the silence that crows like. He swung himself and squinted through and froze because sometimes stories are not warnings and not entertainments but events. They were unnaturally beautiful, the two of them. That was the first cruelty that struck Bran. They were beautiful like the carved figures on the ends of prayer benches, like the saints Septa Mordane spoke of with tight mouth and bright eyes, beautiful in that way that makes you miss the knife in their hand. He did not understand what they were doing, not at first, except that it involved the kind of closeness that his mother's face would not hide fast enough if he came upon his parents by chance. He understood that they were not where they were meant to be, and that their bodies said mine to each other in a way that had nothing to do with oaths taken in front of crowds. He would have gone back. He would have swallowed the shock and the fear and the thrill of holding a secret he had not asked for, and he would have gone quietly back down and perhaps, if he had been foolish, told Jon, and Jon would have taught him silence, or told his father, and then the world would have torn open in a slower way. He would have gone back. But there was a sound, the way a foot does when it remembers to be quiet but cannot help the small skid of leather on dust. Jaime Lannister's head turned quickly. He did not wear his helmet. He did not need armor to feel invulnerable, and his hair made a moving light when it moved. His eyes met Bran's. Things happened all at once that seemed slow because the world stretches itself when it is about to make a new shape that no one can unmake. Cersei looked. Her hair loosened, and her mouth did a thing that included contempt and fear and calculation in the same breath. "Who is it?" she asked, even though she could see. Men have long been prompted to answer any question a queen asks, even when every answer is wrong. Jaime moved to the window, and Bran did not move back because the drop was behind him and the man in front. He did not drop because he did not yet know that this story called for someone to do it. "You," Jaime said, not unkindly. There was, impossibly, a pause in which something in him seemed to reach for some tool he did not carry. Then there was the thing that he did carry, the only one he had always carried. He smiled a little. He sighed. "Ah," he said softly, a man remembering the shape of his own fate in his hand. He looked at his sister. The look was not fear or love. It was a calculation returning a result. Then he looked at the boy who had climbed to where he should not be and had seen what he should not see. "We cannot permit this," Cersei said. Her voice did not rise. If anything, it went lower, seeking the register in which you can make a man kill for you without the word having to be said. "He will tell the wolf. He will tell the world." Bran drew in breath to say, "I will not tell." He would have meant it when he said it because he was a boy who loved the idea of keeping a secret and being strong. He would have kept it for a day or a week, and then it would have come out in some other shape because secrets do not like to be kept by children. They leak through the fingers in play. He would have spoken in sleep, or to Arya when she made him angry, or to Sansa when she told him something wounding. He would have said it in a whisper in the dark to Jon because he could not stand keeping something so heavy alone. He would have told someone because he was human. Jaime picked him up. Men say the act took no time. The truth is crueler. It took exactly as long as a man like that needed to decide what he had always been going to do when forced to choose between two things he loved. He lifted Bran as if the boy weighed nothing and as if he had never had a child of his own to weigh, and he leaned out into air that felt like a friend to Bran and like an enemy to Jaime, and he let go. His mouth moved as he did. The words did not matter. What mattered was that he said something at all. Bran thought nothing. There is no thinking in the first split of fall. There is only sky pulling. There is only the calculation of angles a body does without permission. Then there was stone and a sound no one in the yard would forget even if they lived long enough to forget their children's names. Chaos is a word men use after. Before and during, it's just movement. People ran. Shouts bounced in the stone like thrown buckets. The dire wolves sang a long, unearthly note that made hairs move on arms. The queen's face did not change. Jaime looked out of the window they had dirted and was surprised to find that his hands shook. He put them on the sill as if the stone might teach them a better trick than trembling. They made a space around the boy because the body demands such courtesies even in men who have never thought much about courtesy. Ned was there in the time it takes a good man to go from hearing to doing. Very little compared to other men and too long to save what cannot be saved by legs. Catelyn came and the sound she made undid 3 men who had not cried since they were children. Robb went white and stopped moving for a beat and then moved like a man who has decided to speed the world up by refusing to be slow. Sansa sank down without understanding into a posture of prayer and found that the words she had been taught were set to a meter that did not fit this grief. Arya came with knees wet from the river mud and eyes raw. She made for her brother and a woman's hand, her mother's, came out of somewhere and struck her across the chest to put space between her and the bleeding. The blow undid Arya in a different way. She staggered back and stared at her mother and then at the boy and then at her mother again, and then she made a sound like a puppy being stepped on for the first time in its life. Ghost came up at a long lope and then stopped short, bristled, and lay down absolutely still, his head on his paws, red eyes fixed as if he was a sentry who could hold back the thing at the door just by looking at it. "Fetch Luwin," someone said, but Luwin was already coming with his skirts, hitched to make his legs into younger ones. He knelt and put his hands where they were trained to go. He said nothing because there is nothing to say until you have either a fact or a lie to offer. He felt for the spine and wished that he had a different kind of hand, one that knew how to tell comforting untruths without leaving room for hope to put a knife through later when truth arrives. They carried the boy with more care than any battle standard ever got, up the tower stairs to a bed where men also die. It had been made up with furs and sheets that had seen only good sweat. Catelyn went into the room and would not leave. Ned went out and came back and went out again and spoke the words that men in his position have to speak when their minds have gone somewhere animal and blind. Orders that keep other men from feeling useless. Robert stood and listened to the sound the wolves made, and it went through the fat and the drink and the laughter like light through a leaf. He went to the door and did not go through because the threshold was a kind he could not cross and Amain the man he had been this morning. He closed his mouth over a vow because he had spent the day making vows aloud. He looked at his wife's face and did not trust his ability to parse it. Pity is an art she had never found much use for. She had learned tenderness in other forms. She came to him and took his arm because it would be seen and because she did not want his better angels awakened by sympathetic contact with other people. "Do not," she said softly, close enough that he could feel her breath. "Make your heir's mother hate you more than she already does by forcing that woman from the boy's bedside to listen to you." He drew his arm out of her hand and regretted it instantly because it made his choice obvious. "I will send for more maesters," he said. "We have good ones, but there are those with sterner chains." "You cannot carry him south," she said. "Don't think of it." "I did not say that," he said. He thought it. He did not say it. If he took the boy south, he would be easier to keep safe. He would also be easier to cut where everyone could see. The day sagged on its legs into evening and then into the sodden hour when candles gutter and men look at them as if they could bully the wax into behaving better by refusing to see that they are melting. Caitlin sat. She had wiped her son's face more times than it needed and the cloth on her lap was dry. Her hands had fallen into the habit of counting seams. She could not find the seam between the world before and the world after. She kept reaching for it and closing her palms on air. Words bounced off her like peas. Food came. She did not eat it. Sansa came and said "Mother" in a voice that would break, and Caitlin did not look because to look would mean admitting that there were still children who could be warm and alive while this one lay between two states. Arya came and did not say anything and stood like a sapling waiting for a frost that hadn't been predicted. Robb came and stood again and looked at the door as if his father would arrive through it with an answer that would put the stone back in place. Jon came once and stood just inside the door. Caitlyn's face, which had learned to hold many things at once, attempted to hold this as well. The new piece did not fit. Something broke. It made a sound that no one heard, and it was not a sound that would be remembered against her later when she did not unbreak it fast enough. She looked at Jon and the new name he wore and at the wolf in the hall and at the line of her son's mouth which had lost all his boyishness and kept a terrible beauty, and her love for all her children rose like a boil and scalded her. "What are you doing here?" she asked him, and her voice was very quiet and very dangerous and very full of pain. Jon took the blow. Men would tell this tale later and make her into a witch and him into a saint. The truth was uglier and kinder. She had too much in her. She had to put one thing down. He was the thing her body had trained itself to drop first. He stepped back as if he had been struck with a hand rather than a word. He nodded. Nothing in his face accused her. Nothing forgave her. He left and Ghost left with him, gliding in a way that made no sound. Arya watched him go and thought of running after him, and did not because she had learned enough today about doors that once closed keep you on one side. In the morning, when men's faces look honest because they have not yet remembered the lies they told themselves the night before, Joffrey was found in the yard with an expression that begged someone to say the wrong thing to him. He had not slept well because his hand throbbed and because humiliation is a kind of fever. He was told, gently, that he ought to go offer the lady of the house, who held power now that no crown could deny, his comfort about her son. He refused. He said something about wolves and sticks and why a king need not console those who allow their animals to attack princes. It was Tyrion, of course, who heard him, and there was a perfect, simple geometry in the way his hand traveled to the boy's cheek. The sound of it was clean. It made the guards around them look down and check their buckles as if a breeze had brought chill. Joffrey's mouth fell open. Tyrion hit him again, just enough to make sure that the lessons that need repeating were repeated. "You will go and you will say something that is not whining or bargaining," he said. "You will tell the lady you are sorry that her boy fell. You will do this because people will remember if you don't, and because I am telling you to, and because if you don't I will break my hand on your face again and consider it a day's work." The hound's lip moved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Joffrey learned, as he had learned many times and unlearned quickly, that there were some corners of the world where the law of his mother's gaze did not hold. He went because it hurt more to be hit than to hold his pride for an hour. He did not enter the room. He stood at the threshold and mumbled that he was sorry the boy had hurt himself. Robb happened to be there and stepped to the door and looked at him, and the look did not even disdain. It simply discarded. Joffrey turned and went away and told himself that when he was king he would make a law against the North, broad and simple. And then he thought of Jon, and his mouth did something odd, and he did not know what law would make that go away. Ravens flew. Luwin wrote, and each letter was a small act of courage because the chain around his neck glittered with different crafts, and none of them were the art of surviving the storm such letters raise. He wrote to White Harbor and to the Dreadfort and to Bear Island and to places that no one ever mentions in songs, and he wrote 3 versions to go south because the South eats letters like sweets and always asks for more. He did not write to Tywin Lannister because men like Luwin do not write to men like Tywin except to ask for things like salt pork and safe passage across rivers. But a raven went that way anyway. The queen's ink dried quicker than the maester's, and she had learned to write with her body as well as her quill, with tilts of head and glances that sent men running to their own pens. Her letter to her father made no screams on the page. It was precise. It was a map of grievances and opportunities, with the pieces arranged in such a way that a man who had never worn any color but gold and stone would see how to move them. Ned and Robert walked once more among the dead because sometimes a man needs to practice saying a thing in the ear of someone who cannot contradict him before he says it to the living. The words they said were not apologies and not tactics. They were the speech of men who have taken on a great thing and cannot find room in their chests for anything else. "We will have to leave soon," Robert said. "I will not be able to bear it if I sit any longer in hospitality being thanked for the wine while that boy's mother watches candles." He did not say, "These halls are closing in on me because of what I did to the shape of the world here." He did not say, "If I stay I will do something foolish because I will tire of being good." "You will leave men," Ned said. "You will leave more than you take. You will leave me, and you will leave him." He added with difficulty that made the words slow. "Yes," Robert said, surprising even himself. "Yes, I thought to make him safer by taking him. But I am not a subtle man, Ned. I have made a blow. Let me not now do the thing that will let the enemy turn it back on me. If he stays here, he has you and the North. If I take him south, he has me and 1,000 little knives and my bad habits." He ran his thumb across the old stone and wished for the 1,000th time that stone kings could choose their kings. "We will call it wisdom," he said. "We will call cowardice by a better name, and we will call it wisdom because it might truly be that, for once." "He belongs here," Ned said softly, and set down the sharp edge of the other truth, that the queen would be faster with answers if the boy were at her elbow. "How I hate that you are right as often as you are," Robert said. He turned and set his jaw. "I will make a thing to carry him more. I will put not just a name but lands under his feet." He grinned suddenly, a boy flashing behind the man. "Let me make child's talk. A stag and a direwolf on one banner. Let men look up and know from the color of it that there are still honest storms in this world." "Do it carefully," Ned said. "Do it without insulting our gods or your own." "You refuse to let me be magnificent," Robert said cheerfully. "I will be competent instead. I'll send for the old lawyers who know how the Targaryens used to make trouble stick to parchment. I'll make the boy a Baratheon by law without touching what he is in the bones of this place. He can be Winterfell's son and mine both in different lights. It's a trick. I have learned some tricks." Cersei spoke with her brother in the room where smoke had discolorated the walls. "He has planted a rival in our garden," she said. "He has watered it with law." Jaime stretched his legs and put his head back and made the picture that had once charmed every girl who thought a dangerous beauty would not be dangerous with her because she had been careful with her smile. "He has done a foolish thing," he said lightly. "It makes it easier to predict which of his foolish things he will do next." "He will die," Cersei said. "He will hunt and he will drink and he will boast and he will die, and then the boy he has chosen will take all that belongs to us." She meant it as property. He heard it as grievance. He looked at her with an affection that had its own twin in contempt because he could not forgive her for making him complicit in a boy's fall, and he could not forgive himself for not having found a different way. "Father will not endure this," he said. He endures nothing that is not his idea. Then we must make it his idea to undo it, she said. She moved to the window and looked out as if the yard would present her with a solution. I thought to cut from below, she said idly, as if thinking aloud about pruning roses. But perhaps we cut from above. Perhaps the head that names heirs spends less time making love to breasts and more time rallying men if it fears not waking. Very pretty, Jamie said. We've done that before, haven't we, dear? The world never suspected because your face is not the face of a poisoner and mine is too handsome to be mistaken for a butcher. Do you suppose the gods will grow bored and strike us down for repeating ourselves? I do not believe in gods, she said. I believe in timing. She looked at him and he felt again the little skid in his stomach that had nothing to do with lust. We will not move too soon. The North is too stiff-necked to be managed by open affront this week. We will move when we can call what we do a correction. And the boy? Jamie asked. He did not ask which boy. Do we hedge him with accidents? She considered and then shook her head with a small shiver of hair that was almost girlish. No, not yet. That house is looking for accidents now. If we throw one down in this moment, they will pounce and make it a pelt to drag south and beat us with. We will press gently. We will teach patience to our impatience. He laughed. You will teach nothing to your impatience, he said. It will drag us both by the hair to a window again. Then hold me by the waist, she said, and smiled without mirth. Tyrion, who had surprised himself by liking the boy with the wolf at his heel, went to the Godswood because there are few places in the world where men like him can feel the air and not be judged by it. He found Jon there because men and wolves return to where they can think at the same temperature as the water. He did not make a show of his arrival. He stood a space off. You will not go to the wall now, he said. No, Jon said. He did not say I had made my clothes into black in my mind and now I must dye them back. He did not say I am half relieved and feel small for the relief. I will go to the south. Tyrion snorted. You will go to a place where things wear gold because it distracts you from the flies, he said. You will think often of this water. I think I will need to, Jon said. I will think of this tree. The tree won't think of you, Tyrion said. That is the virtue of gods, whether they are sap or stone or men. He moved closer. Be careful, he said softly. Men will want to make you into a symbol. Symbols are such useful things. They can be waved. They can be stabbed. They can be marched beneath and rallied around. They make very bad pillows and very poor food. Don't sleep on the weight they put on you. Eat from it only when you must. Jon half smiled. Do you give this advice to all princes? I have had opportunity to give it to very few, Tyrion said. They usually do not listen. You might. He paused. Find a teacher, he said. Not for swords, for speaking. Choose one who will remind you that silence is sometimes better and sometimes a failure. Choose one who frightens you a little because he sees through you. Choose one who will not flatter. There are such men even in King's Landing, though you have to wade for them. Some hide behind jokes, some behind faith, some behind the taste for wine. He lifted his cup. Avoid the last sort. He will lead you down holes you can fall into very far. I will look for one with eyes like yours, Jon said. It was an odd compliment and Tyrion took it as such because it softened nothing and wasted no breath. Benjen came to say goodbye. There was no ceremony in his leaving. There never was when the wall called. It does not like to be made into pageantry. He found Jon and put his hand on the boy's shoulder and felt the width of it as if taking measure one final time of a thing he had thought to claim for his own work. He met Ned and they stood like the trees do, two straight things in a wind, and then nodded because they were men who could not afford embraces twice in as many days. He went to Catelyn's door and did what men do when they have nothing to offer but acknowledgement. He bowed his head into the room and held it there a second longer than standard courtesy. She lifted her face and saw the brother she had learned to love because he did not ask for anything from her, and she nodded in return. He found little Rickon in the yard, hair like a nettle patch and eyes like a cat. The boy looked up and made a fist and stuck it out. Benjen knocked his knuckles against it. Bring a man back with you, Rickon commanded. "Bring 2. "I'll bring 3 if I can find them," Benjen said. It was a better oath than many. The royal party began to repack its baggage with the thoughtlessness of men who do not have to carry it. They would not leave yet. Not with the boy hovering in that thin sky between worlds. But they put things away because putting things away makes people feel safer, as if the world can be contained in trunks. The Queen's women closed boxes. The Hound oiled leather. Joffrey watched and did not help because he had been wounded and because he did not understand that helping was a way of keeping other men from disliking you. Night came again. Catelyn sat and did not move, and when men tried to persuade, she did not move, and when they tried to order, she did not move. Ned went to her and reminded her of other times when she had rested and she did not intend to. She did not say aloud that if she took her eyes off the line of that boy's breathing, he would stop, because it is cowardly to voice such thoughts, and she would not be a coward even in this. She blinked so little her eyes burned. Tears did their work anyway and made a tight wetness in the place where sight blurs but the world remains too sharp. On the second night, when even grief tires of its own sound and becomes a low constant thing, she woke from the first shallow sleep she had had in 2 days because her hands hurt. She flexed them, and the pain in the joints reminded her that the body is one thing and will not be cajoled into letting one part be neglected while another is obsessively attended. She lifted the cloth on the table and dabbed the boy's lips. The candle was low. The room was very quiet. Behind the quiet there was a hum, the castle's life moving little things along. She was alone. No, not alone. There was breathing that was not hers and not the boy's. There was the faintest scrape of leather on stone of a kind that men make when they have decided they do not wish to be heard but cannot avoid leaving themselves behind in the world. She did not cry out because she had learned, in the space of 2 days, to be a predator. She did not move because movement has to be paid for and she had spent so much already. She turned her head a fraction and saw something that glinted. For a foolish, slow moment she thought of jewels, and then she thought of the other thing that glints in candlelight and does not make women happy. The man stepped out of the shadow like a story that has not been told enough to be done with itself. He had a look of nobody and of someone who had decided to be no one for longer than was good for any man. His eyes did not look at her. They looked at the boy as if he were a coin. "Don't," she said, and her voice came out as steady as when she had asked men to bring in the harvest under bad weather. "I will kill you," she said then, and surprised herself because she had never said anything like that to anyone and meant it. He did not answer. He moved, and Catelyn Stark moved, and the sound the furniture made was louder than the sound of 2 people fighting for a blade. She took it in her hands and felt the edge and felt her own blood move. The man made a noise in his throat because he had not expected such a thing from a woman who had spent 2 days still. He pushed. She did not let go. He pushed again, and her hand broke and her mind did not, so she kept holding. And then the room changed, because the white blur that had not left that doorway in 2 days came through it. Ghost did not ask permission. He did not choose whether to kill because he did not have that sort of mind. He chose because the air tasted like the fear his boy smelled like when he had first come to him, and he had promised himself something without words. He took the man's throat and did not shake because shaking is for show and shows are for men. When it was over there was a great deal of blood and very little sound. Catelyn's breath came loud like a woman in labor, and she realized, absurdly, that she had had 5 children and had never heard herself breathe like that in labor because she had always kept herself quiet for men's sake. She put the knife down, and it fell the way a stone falls into a basin when a child has decided to make a noise that proves they exist. She touched the boy's face. It was warm. It was warm. She sobbed then, once, an ugly sound that cleared something from her chest. The door was full of men. Ned, Robb, Jory, and their faces were mirrors of one another with horror and pride and a new thing. Fear that had decided to become anger. Later, they would argue about the blade. Later, they would carry it in hands that hid its beauty and its poison. Later, men would speak of betting slips and little lords and debts called in and the way that gold moves faster than justice. For now, a woman sat by her son, and a wolf with blood on his mouth put his head on the blanket, and a man stood with his hand locked around the door frame and kept himself from breaking the room with his rage. In the dawn, Catelyn looked up and found Jon in the doorway again. His face had gone very still. It was a new stillness, and once men see it in a boy, they mark him differently forever. "Ghost," he said, so gently that the name seemed to be an endearment in a language no one else knew. The wolf flicked his ear. "Good," Jon said softly. "Good boy." Caitlin looked at him a long time. Her hand was splinted and it throbbed where would met bone. Her grief had worn through its first fierce layer and was now a terrible, patient thing. She thought of the morning in the hall, and of the little relief she had given to the person she had disliked easiest, and of the way the boy had left when she had told him to. "Your wolf saved my son," she said. The words were raw. They came out without sugar. "He saved him." Jon nodded. He did not say anything noble. He did not make a speech about gratitude not being necessary. "It's what he does," he said. The words could have been arrogance. They were not. He was speaking of the wolf, but his eyes were on the boy. Ned came and put a hand on Jon's shoulder and squeezed until the bones under his fingers spoke to him. "We are going south," Ned said when they stood in the corridor later, where the cold drafted under doors and men did not hear themselves as well as in rooms. Once we know whether—" He stopped. The words refused to be murderers. "I will go," Jon said. There was a steadiness in him, as if something had settled at last, though everything else had been thrown into the air. "I will be useful to you there. There will be rooms where you cannot go because your honor will choke you, and I can stand in them for longer before I am sick." Ned's jaw tightened. "I would not have asked for such service from my son," he said. "I would not offer it to my father," Jon said. His mouth quirked briefly, bleakly. "It is a mercy you are not both to me." Ned almost laughed. He did not. He put his forehead against the cold stone of the corridor briefly, as if measuring something. He had been measuring things since he was a boy. He straightened. "You will need men around you," he said. "Not just those you like. Men who are good at what they do and are narrow in their desires." He named names. A man in the city watch with a scar across his mouth who could be trusted to shut it. A groom who had been sent away from Stokeworth for not taking enough bribes and therefore might be persuaded to accept the right ones. A singer who traded in rumors and could be paid in wine and caution. A knight whose lance work had gone to seed and whose shame made him careful. Jon listened as if he were being given a recipe that, if followed exactly, would make a loaf that would keep a family alive through snow. He took the names into himself and made a little room for them. He did not pretend he understood the subtleties of when to use which. He had learned, growing up in a house with a woman who could not afford to be tender to him and a man who insisted on being just in a world that resents justice, that sometimes knowing the names is enough to begin. Outside the walls, the weather toyed with the idea of snow and then thought better of it. Men talked. They talked on the ramparts and in the kitchens and in the passages between stables where the smell of animals presses into clothes and will not leave for days. Some spoke of kings and heirs. Some spoke of wolves and princes and the way white fur looks with blood on it. Some spoke of the boy who had fallen and the way silence sits in a house when a child cannot answer. Some spoke of leaving, because leaving has always given men courage to say things they would not say when they know they will have to live in the same place with their words. The king came to the room and stood outside the door. He did not go in. He put his hand flat on the wood as if to make a pledge he could later pretend he had not made. Because men lie best to themselves. He looked at the corridor where the wolf had stood sentinel, and he thought, briefly and amusedly, that if he had had such a creature when he was a young man he might not have married at all, but just gone from battle to battle with that white shadow at his knee and died in some ditch with no one to pretend to mourn him. The amusement soured. He imagined two futures, one in which the boy in the bed opened his eyes and one in which he did not. He knew which would make the next months easier. He did not admit, even to himself, which would make them better. Cersei stood at the foot of a tower and looked north. She could not see King's Landing from where she stood. That was another of the things she hated about the north. In the capital, everything important can be seen from a single place if you stand in the right room. Here, the world refused to arrange itself within view. She thought of her father's mouth when he read her letter. She thought of Jon's face. It was not an extraordinary face. It would do for a coin. It would do for a banner. She thought about how to make it into a target that other men would shoot at for her. Jaime came and leaned his shoulder against hers because sometimes leaning kept a woman from knocking her own head against stone. Neither of them said the thing they might have once before windows and boys. They said other things, the kind couples say when they are too tired to seduce each other back into being the people they used to be. "We will go soon," Jaime said. "We will go and pretend to be exactly what we always were. It is a trick I excel at." "You excel at many tricks," she said. "This one is stale. Find me a new one." "In the South," he promised. "Everything is newer there. Even the lies wear different clothes." On the third day, Bran breathed in and out and his fingers moved. No man in the room saw it. His mother did. She had been counting the mill of his breath and the lay of his hands for hours. She shuddered as if something had passed through her. She did not call out at once. She waited to see if the movement would repeat. It did, a tiny flex as of a fish deciding to test a net. She called then, and men came, and the room grew noisier again. The royal party could not leave that day. It would have been indecent in a way even the queen could not argue past. They would wait and call it courtesy. The king drank and laughed and held boys on his knee who were not his and made their mothers feel this was a kindness and not an imposition. And when he was alone, he put his hand over his seal and pressed until the wax under his skin seemed to bruise again. Ned moved through his house with the face of a man trying to marshal his own heart for a march and refusing to make any of his soldiers carry more than their share. Jon walked and listened and did not run from being looked at and did not stand still too long to invite the slop of flattery. Arya found Micah and showed him how to move his feet faster than his pride. Sansa sat with Septa Mordain and allowed tears at the right times and out of sight at the right times and found that none of this made grief less. In a little room above the kitchens, where you could hear bread crackle when it came out of the oven, 3 servants sat and spoke in low voices about the parchment they had witnessed. They were not foolish. They had known, when they put their marks, that they were making themselves part of something that would be both story and weapon. "He wrote it like a man who had swung hammers his whole life," one said. "The maester smoothed it with his little neatness. Between the two, it'll hold." "Will it?" another asked. "When someone with a great deal more gold than we'll ever see decides it ought not?" "They'll try," the first said. "But the thing about writing is that men who are good with it can always pull out a word that emboldened them once and use it again. I think that boy has men around him who will do that for him." "He has a wolf," the third said with satisfaction. "That helps." It did for that day. He slept at the end of Jon's bed, each ear working alone, as if even in a house under guard there were truths only wolves could hear coming. When the candle burned itself to a nub and guttered, the animal's head lifted. He did not growl. He merely moved, and Jon, troubled with too many new ideas to sleep deeply, put a hand out and touched the wolf's neck and found comfort there that he could not take from men. Ravens fell like stones from a very high place and righted themselves and went on. In King's Landing, a scribe who had not much love for his own fingers shuffled the king's sealed message with others and took it to a room where the men who mattered sat and thought of themselves. Conleth the eunuch smiled and lifted it with 2 fingers as if it were a piece of sweetmeat and said in his softest voice, "How interesting." And Peter Baelish smiled with his eyes and found a shelf for it in his mind where he could turn it over and over and find ways to be necessary to all involved. In the red keeps shadow. Men who had thought of themselves as too far from the king to matter suddenly felt royal breath on their necks and did not like the sensation. In the rock, where wealth had learned over centuries to speak softly and be obeyed, a man read his daughter's words and the king's, and put one beside the other, and then did nothing but write 2 lines of his own because that had always been the way he preferred to work. Spare, precise, deadly in their implications. And in the cold house that had become a room of watching, a boy's hand moved again. His mother's lips moved. She did not pray to the 7 because their loveliness had not helped her these 3 days. She spoke to the tree in the warm room where she had not been for days and to the stone in the cold room where she had been too much. She spoke to all the old things and to the least old, which was her own stubbornness. She asked for nothing. She offered nothing. She merely spoke in the way a woman tells her baby, in the first weeks of its life, that it is being watched by a love that refuses to be discouraged. Under Wolf Dream's sleep, A boy walked in a wood where trees had mouths and the air itself was old. He followed a smell that was him and not him. He put his hand out and felt bark that had been touched by men who had died before his grandparents were born. He looked up and saw a sky that was very near. He did not fall. He did not fly. He went forward, each step a choice that meant more than steps usually mean. He did not wake yet. The waking would come with a pain in him for which his house would have to learn a new language. He did not wake yet. He breathed, and his mother watched, and the north, which had seen many things change their names and their shapes, continued to hold itself as if it had been carved for exactly these waits. They changed the way they walked in that house, as if sound itself could bruise. Even the wooden things had more patience with being moved. Chairs took knocks and kept their peace. Doors warned rather than yawned. The wolves learned the new pattern quickest and obeyed it. Gray wind ranged and returned without clatter. Shaggy Dog materialized when Rickon's chest got too tight and set a paw on him like a promise. Lady shadowed Sansa and matched her carefulness step for step. Nymeria found the liminal spaces and watched. Ghost kept to Jon's boot and, when Jon stopped, put himself between the door and the bed without being told. Luwin, who had never written a rule for the governance of wolves in halls, understood that this was what rule looked like when it was made of bone rather than ink. The dagger Luwin laid on the table looked out of place wherever it lay. Men and women came to that room and could not take their eyes from it. The blade took light the way water takes sky, restless and perfect. The grip looked like something that had been an animal once and had learned how to be a handle without entirely forgetting bone. Even those who knew nothing of steel saw that it was the sort of thing that does not get made for common uses. Men who knew a little told each other in low voices that it was Valyrian, dragon-forged, rare as a second chance. The hilt was ridged and black and polished, not the plain wood you see in a kitchen knife or the encrusted whore of a Sellsword's toy. Dragonbone, Luwin said in his even tone, and his fingers twitched because any chain that had a link for curiosity ached when set beside such a piece. Who in the name of the seven hells carries a knife like that to murder a child? Robb said through his teeth. He had not slept. He had turned 3 years older in 3 days, and none of that age had been the easy sort. The sort who expects never to be asked where he got it, Jory said. There was no bravado in his voice at all. It had been wrung out and dried. Or the sort who expects to put it back in the hand that lent it to him, and then go east for his health. A Sellsword wouldn't own such steel, Roderick Castle said. He had his hand on his whiskers and tugged as though he would set them in order by force. Nor a common footpad. A lord. There are lords enough to own it, and few enough to lend it to such work. Luwin, who had made a habit of refusing to be impressed by the things he admired, glanced toward Ned. Whoever sent the man believed a sickroom a place of less attention, he said. They did not account for a lady's patience or a wolf's nature. Catelyn was holding her broken hand against her stomach as if to steady both. When she looked at the blade, her face did not dress itself up for anyone's comfort. They will not account for me twice, she said. They will not account for my son twice. That will be enough. Robert came and stood looking at the knife as if he would rather face a boar than a piece of worked black. He put a big finger to the ridge of the bone and then snatched it back because the thing had made him feel it. Dragonbone on a kitchen errand, he said, contempt and fear fighting to decide which would be allowed to lead. I don't like this, Ned. Not the steel, not the work of it. I don't like that someone thought they could do it in your house. His eye flicked toward Ghost and then, meaningfully, toward Jon. Good thing you keep white shadows here. We will find who it belonged to, Ned said. And if the trail goes no further than the dead man's pocket, we will beat every dust out of that pocket until it tells us where it was damp last. You won't, Robert said very gently. Not here. Not now. He was not insulting the North. He was telling a truth his own laziness did not like, that the trail was already being brushed over in this house by the passage of men and by wider boots far away who had heard the ravens and begun to sweep. Cersei had come as far as the passage and then stopped. She did not look into the room. She did not ask whether the boy had moved again. She had told herself that she would be caught playing at pity if she presented her face where wolves lay, and she had decided that her dignity was a better instrument than a more useful compassion. Jaime alone had the grace to stand and be repulsed. He put his head in and looked at the sleeping boy and at the knife and at the woman and at a man whose face had drawn itself tight to keep from rupturing. The blade made him blink. For an instant he saw himself as another man, a simple soldier with ordinary metal who didn't have to make grand choices and could therefore avoid gross sins. He drew back and found that his palm was damp. "Do you know such workmanship?" Ned asked him later, because a man's honor is both shield and lever, and sometimes you must try it and watch how it bends rather than trusting to the stamp on it. "Has your father a piece in his armory that would match this?" Jaime laughed his beautiful laugh. It sounded like it ought to belong to someone else. "My father's armory is the rock," he said lightly. "You could walk a day and not see the same thing twice, unless it was the same thing in a different state of polish. That," he pointed with his mouth, "is the kind of thing a man buys when he wants to remind himself that he has tasted of everything, or the kind of thing he is given," Ned said, "when someone wishes to bind him." Jaime tilted his head. He did not put his gloved hands anywhere near the blade. "Perhaps," he said, "my father has strong hands. They bind without trinkets." "Thank him, then," Ned said evenly, "for keeping them off mine. There were other hands." They went into flour and lifted loaves whose crackle underlined the talk in the kitchens. They strapped girths that had loosened because horses do not go still for grief. They hauled wood. They folded linen. They made tents tight against a sky that was not yet ready to ease up into spring. These hands did not stab, but they could carry a word as cleanly as any knife. The word went to the great hall, where Wyman Manderley's men gathered around their lord between meals as if he exhaled beef. To the yard, where the Umbers wanted nothing except something to swing. To a corner where a Bolton retainer, skinny, pale, patient, stood as still as the brand on his master's hall and collected news with his eyes. It went to the Tallowers, who know truths by the candles men ask for at odd hours. It found its way into old Nan's mouth, who gave the story to the boys who could stand to listen and the girls who pretended not to, and a wolf whose head lay across the threshold and whose ears pricked at certain words that men mistake for harmless. On the second evening after the attack, Luwin stitched Caitlyn's skin while she gripped the wood of the chair with her good hand and looked too steadily at the tapestry of a summer hunt. "You have had worse labor," Luwin said, because he did not know if silence or distraction was kinder. "I've seen the marks on your body where your children laid claim to you." She did not smile. "They will take those claims seriously," she said, "even when I am dust. I have no objection to that." "Good," Luwin said, restringing her like a bow. "Then don't waste what you have left on hating what didn't cause this." He did not say the name. He did not have to. The name had been a hot iron set down in the room. It burned even when you looked elsewhere. She made an impatient sound, and then, because she was too honest to pretend otherwise even for herself, she let her head drop briefly. "He stood there," she said in a small voice, remembering John in the doorway with the wolf lifting his head at the sound of his name. "And he did not flinch from my anger. I have flinched from his kindness since he was brought into my rooms in a way that no one else has, and I am ashamed of that." "Good," Luwin said again, and tied off the last stitch with a neatness that would have made a seamstress jealous. "Shame is more useful than hate. Shame can make your hands move correctly tomorrow. Hate only makes them shake." She laughed once, low and bitter. "You are a terrible comfort." "I am a maester," Luwin said, cleaning the blood and binding the broken with splints. "My comforts are for the frame of things. Make a bargain with your boy when he wakes. Lady, break neither of you on the iron you have used to hold yourself this long. When he wakes." The phrase was oxygen. Caitlyn breathed it in and let it steady her. "He will need a new saddle," she said abruptly. Practicality, like prayer, gives a woman a way to speak to grief without descending altogether into its room. "He was always a good horseman. He will be again, but differently. I do not know how." "Nor do I," Luwin said. "But there is a little man who fancies himself a giant who might." He did not say Tyrion's name because sometimes speaking the unspeakable too often deprives you of its usefulness later. "We will ask him when he comes back from the wall, if the gods resist all urgings and keep him alive." The gods resisted, Tyrion went north because men like him go where they are least expected to be useful, and because there is a power in standing at the edge of the world and emptying your bladder into nothing. He went with a handful of men and a cloak better than was sensible. He left behind a dozen words, a cup, and a sense that he had found something interesting, and then had shaken himself like a dog and trotted elsewhere for any stick someone would throw and call it a wit. He left Jon with advice no one had asked him to give, and that would turn out to be exactly worth what it cost. Much more than men usually pay for such things. Jon did not sleep the night after the attack. He sat with the wolf and listened for footfalls that would sound wrong. They did not come. He watched Bran's chest lift and fall, and he matched his own breath to that because single men always do that when they find themselves suddenly holding a world in a room. He thought of names the way men think of weapons, what you can do with them and what will be done to you because of them. Luwin had laid the law out for him in an orderly way, names and chains in columns like a schoolroom upturned onto life. The king's recognized son is a prince by courtesy, the maester had said, eyes kind and mouth plain. The king's named heir is more than courtesy. The king's heir is by tradition called Prince of Dragonstone. But the Lord of Dragonstone is Lord Stannis now, and custom is a stone too heavy to move without breaking other things. The king has named you his heir, but has not awarded you a title that would unmake another man's house. For the moment, in this house and wherever the king's seal can reach, you are the king's acknowledged son and heir. It sounded like something that might be printed on a plate and hung in a solar. It also sounded like a man describing a thing that would take offense if you tried to sit on it. What am I called? Jon had asked, because teaching your tongue what to answer is as necessary as placing your feet on ice where your weight won't go through. Not in law, in rooms. In rooms, Luwin had said. You will be my lord, sometimes prince in the mouths of those who believe themselves fast. You will be Jon to those who have earned the right. You will be boy in mouths you cannot strike without making trouble. You will be Baratheon in the south unless the king relents and keeps your north name for the sake of quiet. You will be Stark whenever your father looks at you. The world will call you everything it can think of in an effort to find out which word makes you slow your step and look up. Decide now which ones you mean to answer. Jon decided in that long night that he would continue to answer to Jon and boy when the speaker was older and kind and had earned the laziness. To my lord when the man saying it needed the dignity more than he did. To prince not at all, not here, not while this bed and this boy kept time for his heart. He would answer to Baratheon in rooms where parchment sits at table, and to Stark when he needed to be stronger than he felt. He did not make any vows about what he would not answer to. He had learned that the world is clever at finding your refusals and making entertainment from them. In the candle's guttering hour, Arya slid in with her two brown hair escaping its ribbon like ivy ignoring a wall. She did not walk like a lady. She walked like a creature who had given herself permission to climb furniture if it would get her closer to what she loved. She stopped on the far side of the bed where Jon could see her and lifted something in both hands the way some girls lift their first baby. I made it rough, she said, by which she meant she had pestered Mikken until he threw up his hands and let her listen and watch until a length of thin blade took shape with a hilt to her palm. It's for sticking, not for hacking. She looked at Jon with a tight shining in her eyes. Will you look at it and say if it will serve? He took it and tested it with the same care he gave to other delicate things he had no business breaking. The blade was thin and true enough. The hilt suited a narrow hand. If it bent under misuse, it would be because it had been asked to be a broadsword when its whole value lay in not trying to be. He handed it back. It will serve, he said, and saw how that simple affirmation made her shoulders loosen. Do not show the septa. Do not show your mother now. Learn to hide it as if it were something shameful, because sometimes the only way to keep a good thing intact is to use the world's stupidity about it to get it past their eyes. Arya nodded fiercely. I will practice in the stables, she vowed, or on the roof. Septa Mordain will never take the roofs away from me. She looked down at Bran and reached out to touch his finger with one finger of her own. He is going to wake up, she said, not quite a question and not yet a fact. He is, Jon said, because if a lie must be told, let it be told for this. And when he does, he will want to see you do that and not cry. She drew herself up in pride so raw it hurt to look at. "I won't cry," she said. "If I cry, I will take the tears and put them in a bottle and keep them for when I need to make a river." She looked at Jon as if to make sure he understood. "You won't go away before he wakes." "I won't," Jon said, and at the time it was true. He kept the truth for 2 more days, which is longer than many men manage. Before they left, the king found Stannis's letter folded among several that had made his mouth hurt. The words were as tight as the man's jaw. They did not waste themselves on anything but their own correctness. He wrote to his king as if he were the law's clerk correcting an error on a charge for wine. The style was as it had always been: precise, dry, contempt dressed as duty. "Your Grace, my brother, the effect of your declaration is to upend custom older than our father's father," it read. "It tramples my rights without properly invoking the law that must be followed for such a thing. And it avoids the style and seat that tradition requires of your heir, a style already committed to the use of another." It went on for a considered paragraph that communicated, without saying, what Stannis had long since made his soul. "I am right, and you will pay later to have me forgive you for being wrong." Robert read it with a face not meant for reading. His fingers were too big for this particular sort of insult. He folded the letter, put it with the others, and took a drink. Renly's letter lay under it like a silk cuff beneath a boiled leather vambrace. Robert had set it there on purpose. A man benefits sometimes from seeing what his brothers are in a stack. Renly had drawn a little stag in the corner and written, in a hand that had charmed half the realm and fooled less than half, "My dear brother, I am told your generosity has swollen your household. Permit me to kiss the new darling of your heart when I come to court. And permit me also to bring a girl who will make your eyes feel young again. If you insist on scandal, do it in handsome company." Robert laughed aloud at Renly and growled at Stannis, and then felt as if his heart were in the fire being pushed around with a poker by someone intent on finding something to stick. "They will hate him because they cannot hate me and get away with it," he said to Ned. "They will hate him because the law finally did something human, and men in offices do not know how to forgive humanity when it steps on their paperwork. I will make it worth the hating." "You can make it survivable," Ned said. "That is enough." He spoke again with Catelyn because marriage sometimes demands that men be brave with the wrong people as well as the right. He found her in that room where time collected under furniture like dust, and he knelt to bring his big warm face near enough to hers for quiet to do its work. "I have made folly," he said without preliminary. "I have done hurt. I am never going to be better than I am. Torments me how much I love your house. Your son saved a thing in me I thought long dead, without knowing it. I would not have picked this fight if I had foreseen that the gods would choose to test me on patience so soon and so closely." She listened. She did not offer the idiot comfort of "it's nothing." She had been the wrong too long and done the loving too long to deny either. "Do not make men pay for your self-hatred," she said. It was kinder than it sounded. He nodded as if a favor had been given. "I will take your man away," he said. "I will load him with my hope and my seals and my trouble. I will do it because he will not break and because he has loved me since before I knew what love could make you do. I will do it because you want him to take his honor south and bring it back in a box where it cannot be hurt. I will try to break as little of him as I can." She looked at him then, slowly and fully, as she seldom allowed herself with men not her son or her husband. "If you break my husband," she said, and her broken hand flexed against her breast, "I will become something that the songs don't warn against because the songs don't know our sort of weapons. Do not make me find out what that is." He bowed his head. "I would not," he said simply, and for a moment, unguarded and without any pride to bulk him out, he looked like the boy she had heard of, the one with a hammer and a laugh who had loved a girl so hard he had mistaken his own desire for virtue. It made her almost pity him, and then she remembered she had work to do, and that pity is like cream. Full of fat, spoils quickly, and is wasted in a house that has lived on oats and onions. Ned went sooner than he had planned because the window had opened. Bran had stirred, had moaned, had moved that traitorous finger, and one does not leave a house in the moment after. One leaves in the one before. Waiting hardens grief and makes it brittle. He arranged. He unarranged. He went to the crypt and spoke to stone because stone will not tell on you. He went to his daughters and saw that neither would be comforted long by kisses. He went to Jon. Jon stood over the table where the knife lay. He did not touch it. He did not give it more of his attention than it deserved. He gave it the exact amount and no more. "I have been told I have no business with this," he said. "And that is probably true. But I would like to say what I think before we go." "Say it," Ned said, because he knew how to be a father to a boy he had hurt. He had been practicing all his life. "Someone sent this to make a silence," Jon said. "They misreckoned how in this house, the quieter you ask a thing to be, the louder it becomes in men's hearts. They did it because they thought my name on your lips and mine on the king's parchment would make you stupid and make your lady take to her bed. They may do it again." He took a breath. "So we must not be stupid, and she must not go to bed." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I mean, she must not let them think she will let them do anything to her that will keep her from knowing what is in her house. That is what I meant." Ned's mouth softened. "I knew it," he said. "When Robert asked me for one more thing than a man should ask his friend, I knew I would need help holding up the edges of what would fall. I am pleased to find that the boy upon whom I will lean does not think of himself first. Remember this feeling when men tell you you are entitled to your own comfort. It will save you from their worst gifts." "Will I be Baratheon when we ride through the southern gates?" Jon asked, the question small in his mouth, as if asking it might make something crack. "You will be my son," Ned said, and placed the signet ring he wore on the table beside the king's seal. "This will mean less and more in different rooms. Learn to feel the difference under your tongue. In the city, you will be the king's named heir and men will bow for their own reasons. In my heart, you will be the boy I cradled in my hands and swore to shelter. Do not let one in turn ruin the other." Jon bowed his head, a slow tipping that acknowledged the burden he had asked for and the one being forced upon him. "What should I do when I am unsure?" he asked, so quietly that the old walls leaned in to hear. "Find someone you suspect of wanting nothing from you," Ned said at once. "Ask him the question you are afraid to put to your friend. When the answers disagree, ask yourself which one honors your better self." "I don't know that man yet," Jon said. "You will," Ned said. "He likes dirty alleyways and the smell of ink and the corners behind pillars. He's quieter than you think and sharper than the sharpest. He listens and he will never tell you what he thinks of you unless you force him to. When you find him, keep him." "Varys," Jon said without knowing why he said that name. Ned's mouth made a shape that could have been either agreement or the refusal to spoil a boy's chance at making his own discovery. "Perhaps," he said, "there are more than one sort of spider in that city. Careful whose web you lean on." They left on a day that had been clear in the morning when the pigs had been taken out to root and was gray by noon when the candles had to be brought into the sewing rooms. To be faithful to men's expectations of such events, there should have been a procession. There was merely departure. Horses stamped, wheels complained. Men with duties found that they had forgotten none of them. Lady Stark stood with her hand bound like a relic and saw them go with the poise of a woman who has learned to wave even at the ships that sink. Sansa kissed her mother and almost found something she had never found before in the way they held each other. Perhaps a tender joke, perhaps an acceptance that the world will not be amended by stitches alone. Arya kissed her mother with her whole face and then ran before the septa could catch her and made for the yard to say a goodbye to the wolves that would not be allowed past the gates without fuss. Robb stood red-eared and beautiful in the way young men are when they do not know it yet, and took his father's hand and then his brother's and grinned like a man who cannot find the right words and hopes the grin will carry him instead. "Send us news," he said to Jon. "Send us the sort with meat and not the sort with spices." "I will send what can be chewed," Jon promised. "Keep the yard from getting lazy or it will rut up the first snow and make me sorry I left you to it." Theon bared his teeth and clapped Jon too hard on the shoulder in a way that looked like insult and was the only sort of affection he knew how to give without confessing something he feared might ruin him. "Bring me back something gold from King's Landing," he demanded. "Something not too big to fit in my vest." "I'll bring you a cup," Jon said, "to drink to my ruin in." They smiled at each other with sharpness and sadness and did not hug because boys like them sometimes don't until it is too late. Bran just then moved again. The little jerk of fingers came with a sigh. Men saw it. Women saw it. The wolves saw it and howled once, low and serious, in a way that made the bones of every person with stark blood ring. The queen flinched at the sound and did not know why, because some sounds insult pride without intending to. Sansa cried then, elegantly and in the correct amount. Arya sobbed messily and did not stop when her septa touched her shoulder. Catelyn lifted her head and the room got brighter. "Go!" she said from the window when she saw them in the yard below. She said it like a benediction and not at all like the thing it also was, a curse she hoped the gods would forgive. "Go and do your work. I will do mine." They went. The gate swallowed them. The North did not let itself be seen waving. It had other ways of authorizing departures. The King's Road moves like a thought. Stubborn in places, surprisingly flexible in others, always arriving at dangerous conclusions where you had hoped merely to stretch your legs. It carried them south at a pace that suited men who had to pretend they were in less of a hurry than they were. Robert rode where the road was soft enough not to throw his bones, and drank where it was hard enough to jar them into remembering. He laughed and called for songs about his own life because this was the only sort of vanity he could forgive in himself. He looked at Jon as if checking a horse for a longer ride than he had been bred for. A day out, the rain committed, and men got closer to each other than they liked. The Hound went on looking like God's joke about faces. Joffrey rode with his chin up and the tight line of his mouth promising nothing pleasant. He kept his sword near at all times, the way boys do after they have found that something other than the sword can humiliate them. He watched Jon in side glances that he would have denied. He found, to his bafflement, that he could not decide how to punish a boy who did not appear to be trying to injure him at all, and who spoke neither to him nor about him except when forced to. This was a problem he had not yet learned to solve. How to hate a man who does not present himself for your hatred. The first night's camp south of Winterfell had a smell unlike northern camps. Under the good sense of food and animal there was something else, a fretful little aroma of perfume and coin that travels with queens. Cersei sat in her tent in clean lamplight and undid her hair as if secrets might be hidden in it that she could shake out before sleep. Jaime came and she allowed him to put his fingers in the gold as if winding rope. They did not speak of windows. They spoke of roads. "He will go faster than I had hoped," she said. "He will hand off decisions to men who have already learned how to please him because they are not the ones who tell him unwelcome truths. We shall be in the city before I can teach him to measure his fears against the right things." "We have taught him already," Jaime said. "We taught him that anything done at the edge of sight can be stomached if a joke is made of it. We taught him that lies told with wit are easier to forgive than truths told with bluntness. We taught him that there are things too heavy to lift and therefore he should not strain. We are good teachers." She looked up at him from under hair that made the lamplight warm. "Say something that does not contract my heart," she demanded softly. "You still look like you did at 15, he said obediently, like a man throwing down an old coin to pay for bread, knowing the baker will take it not because it has value but because he is too tired to argue. The next day the sun repented a little. They rode in a light that made everything briefly look like a promise kept. Sansa talked to her septa about the colors in the south that were not worn here. She envisioned cloth that would set off her hair and her skin, and the way she would stand under a lemon tree and be mistaken for a lady older than she was. She tried not to look at Jon because there is a sort of discomfort that arises when you have made an enemy of a person only to find that he is not trying to injure you back. She tried not to think of the way he had held the wolf back from hurting a boy she had once thought she loved. Arya rode like a boy and did not care who saw. She had needled down her boot and a fierce happiness in her throat that scared her and felt like joy. She did not ride near Joffrey or near the Queen. She found the company of men who smelled like leather and onions and dirt and listened to their talk because they did not notice she was there and so said better things. Jon kept to the places from which he could see and not be seen too often. He measured the pace of Ser Barristan Selmy's horse when the old knight thought no one measured it, and saw in that rhythm the ghost of a much younger man in white with a sword so clean that men's fear could see their own faces in it. He watched Renly laugh and make himself beloved with very little effort. The trick was simple but not easy. Remember small things about men and pretend to forget large things about yourself. He watched Vayan Pool count wheels and guess at the weight of the next crossing by the way the wheelwright swore at a missing spoke. He watched the queen's eyes more than the queen's mouth, and saw how often she looked not at the road but at the places where the road ran out and men did not look. Ditches, hedges, shadows. He found himself liking Sandor Clegane, which was a thing no one would have guessed and he would not have said aloud. The man delivered blow upon blow to the world with a composure so complete it might have been kindness. It made Jon think of hounds, and of the way they bear what they are asked to without speech. "Do you mean to be pious?" Renly asked Jon one evening when the prince that was not prince had withdrawn with his food to the edge of the fire and the edge of men's listening. Renly had a way of scissoring himself into any conversation with no one minding until he was already comfortable. He flung himself on the ground and looked up at Jon with an artless admiration for the way youth and seriousness can sit on one face without ruining it. "If you are, we will have to cut out your tongue when we reach King's Landing. The city's gods grow bored of men who are good at being good." "I mean to be quiet," Jon said, "and not make men carry my weight because I was too proud to set it down." "Gods, he speaks like a letter," Renly said with delight. "Stannis would have liked you if liking was a thing he knew how to do." He rolled and propped himself on an elbow and looked toward the queen's tent as if it were a stage. "He will find your elevation inconvenient." "Has he written to you?" Jon asked. He could not tell yet whether Renly kept his mouth unsealed or simply open. "He writes to everyone," Renly said. "We are all students taking dictation in his mind." There was affection in his insult and contempt in his affection. "He will do nothing but do it loudly. Father will move quieter than any spider, and then we will all wish we had kept our childishness a decade longer." "Do you advise me as a friend?" Jon asked. "Or as a man who wishes to be a king's favorite when the king dies?" Renly laughed. "As neither," he said, honest to a fault because he thought the truth suited him better. "As a man who likes handsome boys with wolves better than sour men with ink. If you would like to be grateful, arrange to stand where the light will fall on you when we enter the city. It will make the singers think kindly of you for at least an hour." Jon did not promise to be grateful. He did not promise anything. He was learning how to collect other men's promises like the little carvings idlers make with knives and keep in their pockets as talismans. Ned rode with Ser Barristan and with Jory sometimes and with himself a good deal. He found that the thought of King's Landing made him hold his shoulders as if bracing for a blow that could not be avoided. He thought of Jon Arryn and had to remember that Jon Arryn was stone now and beyond help and beyond requests. He thought of Robert and his thin attempts at being a different man and then not being able to sustain that impersonation. He thought of Catelyn's face with blood spattered on it and felt something inside him become very cold and very alive. A glacier making its slow way toward a sea that had not seen its like in a generation. He wrote letters with a hand that did not shake, and he sent them by men he had known long enough to know in his sleep. To Howland Reed at Greywater Watch he wrote as one only may to a friend who has kept your boy from drowning and your secrets from Heir. A few words, perfectly chosen. To Lord Wyman Manderley he wrote a different sort of few. Well-fed and thick, weighted by the knowledge that a port city's wealth depends on what it permits in and what it refuses. To Roose Bolton, he wrote precisely the words that law and courtesy demand and none that warmth would add, and let the chill of the parchment make the rest of his point. To a watchman of the city that he trusted to know his own alleyways better than any lord knows his hall. He wrote in a tight hand that named a meeting place and a phrase that would make him known. To his wife he wrote the only sort of letter he allows himself, the one that describes weather and the shape of the moon, and thereby tells a woman who knows his hand what he cannot write. The second day out, at midday, they passed a crofter's hut where the roof had done its best and winter had done better. The woman outside had 3 children and a pig and a face that had not had laughter sewn into it. She looked at the royal party with the interest of a person who cannot afford curiosity as more than a pastime for the eyes. Robert reined in and tossed coin in a way that would later become a story in that house for a generation. One of the children scrambled for it with a seriousness that would have made a queen cry if she had ever permitted herself that sort of emotion. Jon stopped too because the little boy had a look he recognized, that open hunger in the face that is not only for bread. He dropped from his horse and picked up a second coin that had rolled under the pig and had resisted being trampled. He offered it to the woman instead of the child. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. The coin glinted in a way that made promises to a poor woman. She took it with no speech. "You will spend it on salt and not on wine," Jon said, and smiled in a way that attempted to be charming and achieved only earnestness. The woman smiled back in that solid country way that is neither gratitude nor dismissal. It was acknowledgement, the best coin of all. "Do not get into the habit," Cersei said later, when the tale had made its way to her effortlessly. "News likes to be near power. It doesn't mind if that power comes in a woman's dress. Giving makes children greedy. You will create a class of beggars wherever you pass." "Those exist already," Jon said, "and did not say you made them. It is a poor habit to take spoons from men and then hate them for eating off their hands." He did not look to see if she was angry. He had learned with her that anger is like rain. You do better to look where your feet go. At night, when the camp pulled itself into a circle and had opinions about the fire as if it were a council, the small man with no taste for long silences in his own company was missed by those who had not known they had liked him. Sandor Clegane took his drink into the far edge and watched flames in a way that made men uncomfortable. Sansa practiced being unremarkable, which is the first trick a young girl must learn when the world has told her it will remark too much. Arya practiced being the opposite and got slapped quietly on the knuckles by her septa when she reached too far into a pottage. Jon sat with his back to a wheel. Ghost lay with his head on Jon's boot. No one stepped over the wolf without subconsciously making a sign to a god they were no longer sure they believed in. On the 6th day, Ned called Jon into his tent, and in the small privacy there sealed a little ring that had been made for the boy's hand. The face was divided. Half the crowned stag and half a direwolf's head, cleanly cut, each eye a tiny garnet dark as clotted blood. "Wear it when you must sign," Ned said. "Do not when you must disappear. Never let it be unwatched in a room with clever men." "It is ugly and honest," Jon said, pleased with it in a way that embarrassed him. It felt like something you could hammer a nail with and still be proud to show a lord. "It is what you are," Ned said, a joke and not. They met riders going north occasionally, men in furs and women with baskets that they kept out of the way of hooves with expert hips. The news traveled both ways every time, faster than horses. "The boy breathes," a goatherd called down at the road from a place where she stood like a brown twig. "He moved his hand yesterday. Old Nan says he will wake when he's done with the dreaming." Arya sat tall in her saddle and shouted back, "Tell old Nan to tell him that I will be very cross if he makes me wait any longer." And she heard the laughter come down like a coin flipping in air. Sansa folded her hands together and made a little prayer to the mother because certain habits outlast girls' patience with their own naivety. Jon did neither. He felt relief that was too raw to show and put his hand down to the wolf's head. Ghost closed his eyes and sighed like a bellows easing. They overtook a murder of crows arguing in a field, and it took 3 boys with sticks to convince the birds that the dead thing they had gathered over belonged to the road. It was a fox with its guts out. Crows talk loud about the justice of the world when theirs is well served. The boys, brown and slippered and proud of their courage, stood aside for lords in a way that told you this was the first time they had been useful beyond their own walls and had found a taste for it. Joffrey made a face and said something about smells. Jon gave one of the boys a nod as if the child had accomplished a task worth a man's admission at a step, and the boy went red and would talk too loud at dinner and be shushed by a mother who wanted him to grow into a man who would be permitted to sit decently. That night, Renly sang badly and laughed at himself and got others laughing with him. Robert told a lie about a boar that mocked him when he pissed that was not quite untrue. Cersei smiled and asked perfectly pleasant and perfectly unanswerable questions. Ser Barristan remembered a thing from the Blackwater and shared it without attaching his own pride to it, and thereby made the men around him content. And Jon learned a different lesson than the ones Luwin taught, that rooms make men what they want to be, and if you are careful you can make a room that wants the best from men rather than the worst. On the 9th day, they left the last of what any northerner would call a tree behind, and the road began to feel like it knew things you didn't want to. The smell of the south reached them in advance, sweet and rotting at once. Jon did not like it. He had expected to dislike it. He found that he could bear it better than he had told himself, which made him suspicious of his own ability to concede rancor smells later. He put the suspicion on a shelf where he could look at it later and see if it had sprouted teeth. At the first little town with walls and proper gates, they were treated to a display of the mayor's wife's idea of what kings like. Tables, flowers, a fat child scrubbed so hard he had no skin left to speak of. The woman curtsied and spoke at length while saying nothing. Robert did the opposite. Cersei made a compliment that the woman would remember for the rest of her life and tell her daughters in detail. Renly kissed a hand he had no business kissing. Joffrey found something unworthy and let it be seen. Arya asked the fat child if he had ever fallen out of a tree and thereby made an ally for an hour. Sansa asked if there was a lemon tree and saw the look of apology before the words and smiled to ease it. Jon stood at the edge of the performance and watched, and in watching learned what he would later need to know. Who keeps the keys to such towns, not on a ring but behind their face? Who would hide a runaway? Who would sell him for 1 coin plus flattery? Who would refuse? They set off in the morning with cheeks sore from courtesy. The next day, Varys' little birds, these were different birds, wild, not his, carried back to King's Landing that the king had smiled and the queen had smiled and the north had looked at them as if they were a frost and the north was a stone. The letter with the seal made its way to the Tower of the Hand and found it empty, then slunk down to another room where a man in gray stood in shadow and smiled at what he read, as if he had been told a joke that he would enjoy telling until someone bled for it. Peter Baelish lifted the scroll and let it roll again in his hand and set it to one side. My, he said to no one. The king gives himself a son trained to be a shadow and calls it prudence. How I approve, and how many friends it will cost him. Varys, when he took the same letter and read it with his head bent just so, as if listening to something other than the paper, smiled a different smile, a moth's smile. Kindness, he murmured in the voice of someone practicing a prayer he doesn't believe, the most useful of crimes. He sent 2 boys with honey cakes and a message to a man in the watch whose boots squeaked and another to a woman in the queen's retinue with a mouth too thin for pleasure. He made no sound louder than the rustle of silk. The city rustled back. On the 12th day they camped in a place where the king's road narrows between 2 clumps of old oaks, as if to make men who have done wrong lower their heads. The hound made a point of sleeping where he could put his back against a wheel. Jory sat with the men he trusted most and taught a boy from the stables how to sharpen without wearing his blade to a wire. Jon lay and dreamed of steps under earth and faces that had never learned to grow bored with watching. He woke with the certainty that, if he went down to the crypt this minute, he would find something waiting. He opened his eyes and found only night and the slow breath of the wolf. Somewhere far to the north, a boy in a bed opened his eyes and found that he was not falling. The first thing he felt was the absence. Nothing under his belly and thighs. Nothing where something had always been. It was wrong, and the wrongness shattered him before any other sense could come to his rescue. He made a sound like something caught in wire, and his mother's hands were there at once because she had made herself into a net. He took air. He took it again. Luwin spoke, low, about bones and cords and about how being alive sometimes includes the insult of learning to do without what you had used to call yourself. Bran did not care, and then, in the way children do when their souls are more elastic than their parents' fear, did care all at once. He gulped the air and sobbed and then stopped crying as if someone had turned a stopcock. There was a crow, he said thickly, as if that would explain where he had been. And the tree was speaking, and I could fly. You will again, his mother said without knowing what she promised or that she had told the truth. He slept again and woke to find Hodder at the door, saying Hodder as if it was the name of a prayer he had been taught as a child and never got tired of pronouncing. He woke to find old Nan's voice in the corner telling the sigils of houses, as if that would make a boy forget that his own body had changed its blazon. He woke to find summer in the room, though the snow outside suggested winter. He woke to Ghost's white head with a mouth too red and a voice that happened entirely without sound in the way a wolf speaks with his utter stillness. And he woke, later, to find his father's letter in his mother's hand, saying things about the moon and the shape of the river's bend and all the concern a man can set on a page without writing please. When the news reached the road, it lightened men who had never seen the boy. Jory laughed and hit PYP on the helmet and made the lad curse in a way that was music. Arya stood up in the saddle and nearly fell, and did not because her horse loved her. Sansa clapped and then caught herself and looked to see who was watching. Robert threw his cup into the air and drank what came down. Cersei heard and smiled and thought, well then, we shall have to try again differently. She did not say it aloud. She did not have to. At Moat Cailin, ruins sniffed at them and refused to be impressed by robed men or kings. They passed the narrow ways that had made southern invaders regret their ambitions. And Jon thought, it is a comfort to know there are places still that remind men what happens when they believe the world is an instrument for their songs. He ran his hand along a stone that had not been moved by human will in hundreds of years, and found it good that he could touch a thing untouched by law. They came to the trident and found that river memory is longer than men's, and that it had not yet forgiven what had been made to happen there in its shallows. Robert's laugh thinned and then came back thickened. He drank that night alone and then did not drink to see how that felt. It felt like a hammer not quite in his hand. He put his hand where the hammer would have been and went to Jon's tent. It was here, he said, not explaining which equaled explanation, because the boy's eyes were good and had been on the water all evening. I was a god then, or thought I was, and she was... He did not finish. He looked at the boy and saw a care that made his own youth look like a stain. I am going to change my mind, he said to Jon, as if asking permission. About you, not about who you are. About where you should be. Jon did not move. Tell me, he said. You will not ride into the city beside me, Robert said. You will go ahead with Stark and his girls, but not under my banner. My lords must be taught gradually to think in a new way, or they will bleed their horses trying to outrun the thought. When I show you to the city as my heir, it will be in a time and manner of my choosing. In the meantime, you will not fail to exist. You will learn the rooms before your name precedes you. You will teach yourself whose shadow runs where and when. When I am ready to strike with a hammer, I will find where you have placed the nail. Jon had never wanted to be a nail. He managed to like the idea anyway. This is wise, he said without flattering. It will also be read as caution by men who think caution weak. I know, Robert said. I will drink with them and be loud. And then I will be careful. It will hurt me. It will do good for you. Jon nodded. I will go with Lord Stark, he said. I will keep his step. I will not be a dog at his heel unless he whistles. I will be something else that no one has a name for yet. Robert grinned then, as at a jest that had teeth. Good, he said. Do that. They parted at the crossing over the Green Fork with less ceremony than would have been proper if men had been watching from balconies. The king pushed on with his banners and his music and his appetite. The hand who was not yet the hand went by an older path with fewer witnesses. The queen made sure that men saw her disdain for the mud and her patience with her husband's choices. Joffrey wore a sulk like a mantle. It trailed in the road and gathered dust, and men avoided stepping on it. Renly made friends with butterflies. The hound did not look at any of it as if it mattered. You will be good, Septa Mordane said to Arya for the 100th time as they left the last chance to turn back. You will remember that your sister's virtue is the virtue of our house, and you must not make it difficult for her to shine. Arya, who had half heard Bran talk in his fever of flying, and had decided that life is too short for other people's virtues to bind you hand and foot, said nothing. She pushed her heels into her horse's flank and went forward until she was riding beside Jon. Sansa saw and felt a jealousy that had nothing to do with boys and everything to do with ease, and wondered why the world had made her good at a game she had not chosen. The road shook itself and became the King's Road proper, trim and fattened by the passage of men who could pay for it. Villages were cleaner, inns prettier. The food began to taste of herbs that had to be called by new names because the North had none for them. The songs in the common rooms had more sighing and less banging. The women's corsets were tighter. The men's eyes traveled more and listened less. Jon learned to feel the way the South weighs its people, watching how a woman's smile can alter the direction of a meal and how the weight of a purse changes the shape of a man's words. He practiced being uninteresting and discovered that the most dangerous thing a man can be is invisible by design rather than neglect. He also learned that he had allies he had not purchased. Ser Barristan took to speaking to him sometimes about nothing, and in speaking told him everything, about loyalty as a harsh diet and not a feast, about honor as a thing that gets heavier with use, about killing men as a task no one should learn to do without also learning how to clean his own blade. Renly taught him the shape of folly and how to avoid letting it rub off on him as they danced around fires to music that would never be written down. Even the queen, by hating him well, taught him that there are rooms that will never accept him and so should be robbed rather than courted. Sansa watched his patience with their betters and thought it a kind of school. She watched the way he deferred without looking lowered, the way he smiled without baring teeth, the way he cut meat without looking at his knife and never scraped his bread bone dry. She did not find him handsome and wished she did. She did not like the way the hound's eyes followed him and marked him as a sort of man who did not give off any scent the hound knew what to do with. They were 2 weeks from the city when they turned aside toward an inn that smelled better than it looked and found in the common room a man whose face made a woman drop the ladle and then pick it up with a cry of apology. He wore a squirrel's smile and a feather in his cap and had hands that said they had learned to count from an early age and never been distracted by better lessons. He sidled up with the affability of a debt that has just come up with a way to be paid, and bowed and said, "My Lord Stark, you look exactly as I expected and yet better. The city is mad with love for you already. And for you," he added, turning to Jon and skipping artfully past him and back as if he had been caught staring at a too bright light. "You must be the boy they whisper about as one whispers in a chapel when one has done wrong and hopes the gods are inattentive." "Lord Baelish," Ned said in a voice that wiped grease from a plate with one stroke, "I did not expect to encounter the Master of Coin at a crossroads. And yet I am at all of them," Littlefinger said amiably. "I like to know which way money will walk if I let it out of its cage. The king rides hard. The queen rides harder. The city makes ready to pretend to be impressed. I thought I would come and practice my bows." "You are doing it too low," Arya observed, unable to restrain truth. "Men will think you mean it." Littlefinger threw back his head and laughed as if a child had made a clever jest. "Out of the mouths," he said. He looked at Sansa and made his own mouth do something that would be flattering to a girl who wished to be pleased and would later wonder if she ought to have been insulted. "You will need shoes from Bravos," he said. "King's Landing will eat your little northern shoes in 2 days." Sansa blushed and hated herself for it, and then loved herself for being able to imagine such shoes. Jon stood and watched and disliked the man in a way that did not rise to anger. It was more like encountering a wind you know you will always have to lean into to keep your course. "I bring a thing," Littlefinger said then, failing at the last moment to keep the triumph out of his voice. He made a show of the smallness of the packet he held. "From a woman you trust more than is healthy. She asked me to see this to you because she is near mad with care and disinclined to be patient with couriers." He glanced down at Arya and Sansa and then over their heads at Jon and decided where to place his dagger. "Your lady wife sends her regrets that she could not follow you in person," he said. "She sends also, but I never spoil a denouement. Open it, my lord." Ned took it. His hands did not shake. The little thong tied about it had been knotted by a woman who had tied many things in her life. Linens, children's shoes, laces of bodices, the complicated concatenations that keep households from falling apart. He smelled irrationally. A whiff of winter fell on it. Fat and snow and singed wool. He opened the paper. Inside lay another parchment, and within that a shape like a memory. The dragonbone hilt and the blade that drank light. "It belonged," Littlefinger said, lifting his brows and letting his mouth form the words like confections, "to Tyrion Lannister. Or so a man who lost it to him at play swears on his mother's grave. One cannot discount men's mothers so easily, in my view." He spread his hands. "I thought you'd want to know which of your house guests brought gifts to your son's bedside." Jon's hand went out, and then he restrained it because he understood that sometimes not touching a thing keeps it from becoming yours. Ned did not look at him. He looked at the blade and did what men like him do when confronted with a thing that wishes to make them foolish. He refused to jump to the answer that would please his anger. "Lord Tyrion has gone to the wall," Ned said. He left my house without a backward glance and with a word that sounded like friendship. He advised my son in a matter that will let him sit a horse again. He looked at Littlefinger. This dagger being his proves less than you wish it to. He has money enough to own such a thing without loaning it to murder. A knife like this is as likely to have visited as many hands as there are seats at this table before it found its way to the man who tried to cut my boy's throat. You know that as well as I do. Littlefinger smiled. It was an admission and a reward. Of course, he said. But I would not be doing my king's business if I did not keep his hand informed of all the lovely, sharp possibilities. And I knew you would lose nothing by having one more reason to look coldly upon a Lannister. He flicked a glance at Jon then and found himself, unexpectedly, disliking the steadiness of the boy's gaze. Careful of making firm enemies too quickly, my young lord, he said artlessly. They tend to last longer than friends. I was born with a few, Jon said. They have not stopped me breathing. Neither does the smell of shit, Littlefinger said. One learns to ignore it. It still stains. Arya made a face of complete disgust and Sansa flushed again and Littlefinger, satisfied that he had left his little hooks in the places he'd intended, bowed too low once more and left before Ned could ask him to. Ned stood and looked at the blade and kept his face quiet. Jon looked at the blade and thought of a little man pissing off the edge of the world and an earnest instruction about saddles. He did not say away with such tricks. He simply did not put his hand on the knife. They reached King's Landing in a slanting light that made the city look honest. It was not. It was a mouth with too many teeth and a stomach too used to not having to digest what it took in. The walls had been built to impress men who have never seen real stone. The gates yawned obligingly. The smell hit them like the truth you have been avoiding, rich and crude and vital. The noise rose. Sansa's eyes widened and then she shut them a fraction, because she wished to see it as she would remember it, not as her first startled glance dictated. Arya sat up as if watching theater. Jon sat as he had all along, and watched men at the edges. Porters, whores, boys with mouths too old for their faces, guards with the disgust polished off them and only the bone left. They passed under overhanging houses and laundry that did not know it was in the presence of majesty. They passed a man with a tray of oysters and another with a tray of knives and a woman with a belly like a moon. And then they climbed into the Red Keep and there, suddenly, the world went hard and bright. It was all red and pale stone and heat. Ned felt hot and angry at once, like a man forced to stand closer to a fire than is good. Sansa's love for it arrived the way love sometimes does, as a betrayal of everything she had thought she knew about herself. Arya's suspicion arrived the way suspicion always does in her. Grin first, then a hand to the hilt of what she would later learn to call her great mercy. Varys swam out of a shadow and made them feel as if they had been expecting him. Peter sketched a bow that did not change by so much as a hair because bows, like jokes, must be practiced until they look like instincts. The Queen swept down a stair and kissed the air in Ned's direction in a way that let him choose whether to feel insulted. Joffrey did his best impression of a king's son and nearly pulled it off for 3 breaths. Robert arrived last in a way that made everyone know that he had been there all along in their minds, and that was the only presence that mattered. The hand, he said loudly, as if naming a dish that had just been set down. And the boy. The city will grow fat on the talk. Let it, Cersei said, and kissed him on the cheek where all could see. If they are talking, they are not planning. Talking is cheaper than planning, Robert said and laughed. He nudged Jon as if with his elbow. Keep count of the ones who do neither, he advised. They will be the trouble. Jon kept count. He found that men who watched and neither spoke nor schemed were sometimes the ones with the deepest wells. He learned the corridors by their drafts and the alleys by their puddles. He learned the way the city speaks to itself in 3 languages: gold, sex, and fear. He learned to walk with a face that did not itch to be believed. He learned to recognize the sound of Sandor's boots behind him and the hush of Varys Silk's approaching. He learned which stair would always make his foot slip and which courtyard made the best place to watch just before dawn. He learned that Peter Baelish smiled in 2 shades and that neither meant what men thought. He learned that Ser Barristan's back was straighter at sunrise than at noon, and that he could be trusted more when the sun was low. He learned the particular rhythm of Jaime Lannister's idle walk. It had a music in it, and a boredom that made Jon uneasy, as men with too much pride and too much skill sometimes do. He learned the look of Cersei's face when a plan had gone right, narrow, satisfied, and when one had not, amused, dangerous. He learned, too, how small he was. In the council chamber, where the table is a circle so men can pretend they do not hate each other in lines, he sat sometimes behind Ned's left shoulder and listened. Renly prattled, charming even in sense. Varys fussed kindly. Littlefinger lost and found coin in the air with skill. Pycelle smelled like old roses left too long in a vase and said history as if it were a soothing salve rather than a sharp. Stannis' chair was empty and more eloquent for it. Cersei sat when she liked and did not when she liked, and whenever she sat the room changed temperature. Ned spoke little, and when he did the room either went quiet or got ready to punish him for meaning what he said. Robert shouted once and then looked genuinely ashamed of himself and told a story as a penance. Jon learned the dance steps in his head and practiced them in a corner where no one bumped into him. He saw the first of the city's small cruelties, too, the ones that prepare you to ignore the larger ones. A boy was beaten for eating too slowly. A man was cuffed for smiling at a woman who was not his. A woman had her hair cut off in the street for calling a queen's man by his name with tenderness. Jon took note. He said nothing at first, because he had been told by his father not to throw himself at a wall until he knew how tall it was. He stored up the small shames. He waited for a place where they would align with something bigger. Ned asked for a room for him not too near and not too far. He lodged him in the Tower of the Hand, but not in the line of any immediate arrows. He gave him a man named Tomard, Tom to those who trusted him, who could be counted on to decide correctly when to take the boy somewhere else and when to stand in a doorway stubborn as a plank. He told Jon never to meet anyone alone in a room with only one door. He told him to let Varys' whisper tickle his ear and never scratch. He told him to keep the ring in a pouch until it would do someone else more harm to be seen with it than it would do him. "You make me sound like a thief," Jon said. "I am teaching you not to have your pocket picked," Ned said. "If you find yourself picking a pocket in turn, you will be sorry only as much as you are a good man." He saw Sansa placed into rooms that made much of her, and watched her bloom in the heat as roses do, even as some petals browned under the sun. He watched Arya suffer in rooms that did not know what to do with her and watched her find someone who did. Syrio Farrell came with the way of speaking that makes men who think knives and swords the same thing show their ignorance, and when Arya came to supper with sweat across her lip and her hair soaked through and her eyes alight, Jon felt a gratitude toward a stranger that he had not known he had room for. He said nothing to Sansa about it. He did not tell her that something similar existed for her, a teacher who would teach her to make gentleness a blade. He could not find such a one for her yet. He made a note. He set out to. Ghost did not like the city. He did not dislike it the way men do by distaste. He simply did not acknowledge it as a place designed for wolves. He went down with Jon into the cellars and liked it best where it smelled old. He allowed himself to be crowded by no man and learned quickly which servants would scatter neatly and which would attempt to thump him with a broom and thereby make of themselves a lesson for their mates. On the third day, which men like to pretend is important because the number pleases them, Robert called the court together for an afternoon of receiving petitions and pretending that the world changes because men say please to a man in a chair. Jon stood against a pillar and practiced the first real trick he had learned in that place. Watch without committing your attention so fully that anyone watching your watching knows what you watch. He watched a fishmonger complain about taxes to Littlefinger's mild dismay. He watched a woman request relief from a lord who had made her goods his definition of rent. He watched Pycelle snore delicately and then wake. He watched a black-haired boy in the second rank look at the king with an expression that made Jon's stomach go cold. The look was not simple envy and not simple longing. It was the look of a boy on the edge of calling another man father. He leaned very slightly. Tom seized his sleeve almost imperceptibly. "Not this one," Tom breathed. Jon had not intended to laugh. He made a very small sound with his nose and stopped. "Do you know him?" he asked. "I know his sort," Tom said. If he has sense, he'll take the coin someone tossed him when the king looked his way and go home to his mother and braggart brothers. If he doesn't, he'll try to come closer. Then he'll find himself used by someone who likes this sort of boy for the phrase he forces through their throats, and spit out. Watch. And don't be the man they try to feed him to. Jon kept his place. He watched. He did not move when the boy tried to press forward. He did not move when he was hence discouraged efficiently and roughly by one of the gold cloaks. He did not move when the boy's face changed and the look turned bitter and then small. He did not move until he had to, when the queen's gaze flicked, very briefly, to him and then to the boy and then past them both. He felt the chill of being marked again and did not shiver, because being marked is part of the lesson and shivering is how you get taught the worst version of it. Ned found that the city had a way of taking the good shape of his day and denting it in one careless movement. He mended again and again. He worked. He made enemies without trying. He made allies because men who have not seen such a thing as consistency in a long time are drawn to it as the thirsty are drawn to puddles and wells alike. He asked questions about the crown's debt that made Littlefinger pluck, invisibly, at his beard. He asked about the small numbers in the corners of matters men wished were large enough to hide in. He asked, very quietly, what had killed his friend and what was intended for the boys he had made his sons. The answers came in drips and in floods and never in order. He found that the city could drown a man not only with water but with words. He swam. Robert had a better day and a worse day. A bore was talked about. A singer made a good joke. Cersei did not correct him in front of another lord. He was alive, which was both triumph and burden. He went to Jon as if walking into a chapel at dusk when you think no one sees you kneel and so you can bear to. He brought news of a hunt that was being planned and food that was being ruined by his cooks, and a thought he had had about making the boys' elevation more formal and more permanent in a way that would take the wind from the stinkers' mouths. "We will go to the September," he said, making a face at the word because he had never liked the gods that wore jewels and kept to what he had wooed in the north. "We will do it with witnesses no one can later claim were too drunk to count. The High Septon will bless what I have written. I will speak in front of the gods and men and set my son before them. They will not like the precedents. They can like the way my foot feels on their necks even less." Jon did not wince. "Lord Stannis," he said, because the correction had to be made and one day it might save a piece of Robert's life to have it said to him by someone who did not want to shame him, "will protest. He will not stop. He will make the law stand taller than it is. He will say that you cannot do this without unmaking half of the rosters of the realm's duties with one stroke." "I can unmake them," Robert said. "And I will. He will live through it. He is a man who knows how to live through things. He enjoys it." He thumped a hand on his knee and grinned in a way that comforted and frightened. "Will you stand with me when I do it?" Jon thought. He did not make a picture in his head of what he would look like in the September with light making him into something better. He thought of Catelyn's broken hand binding. He thought of Bran's finger moving. He thought of Luwin holding two truths at once in his hands like birds and keeping both alive by not squeezing either too hard. "Yes," he said, "but not close to you. Not yet. In the crowd, where men who hate me can't point at me when they explain to themselves why they are angry at you." Robert looked at him for a long moment as if measuring a horse's wind. He nodded then. "Strong," he said simply. "Good." The days lay themselves down in lines like that. The city woke and shouted and pretended to know what it was shouting. The king stumbled toward a good thing and then away from it. The queen placed herself where reflections were best. The hand did his work and felt it pull his shoulders toward grief. The boy learned to be present and not be a spectacle. Ravens arrived and left. Knives were admired and then forgotten. Wolves made themselves known slyly and were then not seen at all for days and days. Back in the north, a boy who had been taught by a tree how to fly and had been told by a window how to fall began to tie together what had been left to him. He learned that the world had taken his legs and had left him his hands and his head and his name. He learned that a saddle could be made for a boy whose body had changed its ways. He learned that a wolf can be summer even when the snow insists it will not leave, and it was Summer, not Ghost, who came into his room more often now while Ghost went south to guard a different boy. He learned that Rickon would not be soothed and that he, Bran, was more useful as a patient than he had ever been as a boy with too much freedom. He learned to listen when men thought he should be sleeping and to sleep when men thought he should listen. Catelyn learned how to send and receive without rising from a chair. She wrote to her sister with a hand that would not show fear and learned nothing she could have used, because Lisa had learned only the language of her own terrors and cannot be translated into action. She wrote to her father and he wrote back with love wrapped in caution. She learned to hold herself together under the weight of a thread that ran between her house and the red one in the south, and she learned to not hate the white wolf that appeared sometimes in her dreams and stood in the door of the room where her son slept and kept other wolves out. Winterfell breathed the slower way that big healthy houses do when a large noise has gone away. Robb shouldered work he had not been given but that would have fallen anyway, with or without him. Theon preened and did it less, and for that alone might have been worth keeping. The smith hammered. The stable boys flirted and got caught and laughed. The gods would made no speeches. The ravens looked like broken letters in the sky and fell sometimes onto the tower where Maester Luwin kept hope in one cage and pragmatism in the other and fed both with equal hand. And the city, King's Landing, having got the thing it always wanted, something to talk about, prepared itself to do the thing it always does with it. Sniff for blood. Sansa's name went up on men's tongues as Joffrey's future. And then someone whispered Jon's and the whisper slithered alongside hers and made children ask their mothers questions in corners. The little lawyer's hands of the realm rubbed themselves together over the phrase Prince of Dragonstone. Then stilled when reminded by dry Stannis letters that the rock was already sat upon by a man who would not shift. The faith consulted its own memory for reasons to be outraged and found none older than 200 years that would stand up in conversation. The gold cloaks were told to be twice as careful against knives in the night and then given less money to do it with and so understood that nothing had changed under the sun. Tyrion Lannister, pissing from the edge of the world in the hardest place for a little man to keep his footing, laughed and said something about the way ladders in the north have too many rungs between landings, and started back south with winter in his cheeks and a plan for a saddle in his hand. When he came through Winterfell, carrying cold and some warmth, he found a boy with a brace of leather around his middle and eyes that did not belong to any child he had met. He gave Bran the drawings as if giving sweetmeats and was surprised to find himself wanting to know whether the mother thanked him with eyes rather than lips. She did both. Ghost stood at the door and had not forgotten him. The wolf stepped aside to let him through like a guard who knows a better guard when he sees one. Tyrion patted the white head and made a joke about the Lannister colors being poorly represented in this house, and then held his hand very still when Ghost put his nose near the ring he wore. "Tell your brother," Tyrion said, "that I will bring him back a story from the city that will make him think twice about ever agreeing to live there." Bran nodded solemnly and resolved to hold the little man to that promise. It is one of the advantages of children that they expect to be given what they are told they are being given and are not shy about asking for it when it does not arrive. He went on, of course, and a good many things went with him. Risks bundled in laughter, lies disguised as kisses, men prepared to swear that law serves them and not the other way. The city opened its arms to all of it and pretended that it had not once tried to eat Jon Arryn and then refused to acknowledge the bones. The king called a hunt and believed he had a right to call everything by whatever name he liked. The queen called for patience and learned to enjoy it. The hand called for numbers and got words. The boy called nothing, yet found that men were beginning to answer to him anyway. If a pattern was forming, then it was the pattern that had always undone kingdoms and saved them both. How far a man will let his better nature lead before his worse nature drags him by the ankle. How much a city can stomach before it vomits. How many times a boy can tell himself to be careful before a moment arrives at which caution is a luxury. The dire wolves settled into their roles in the song, one in each place where he would be most misunderstood. The ravens began to choose their branches. The gods kept their counsel. And winter, about which everyone had been warning one another for 20 years, as if saying it often would make it hesitate, checked the edge of its cloak and considered when to fling the rest of it down. In the Red Keep, under a window with very clean glass, Robert Baratheon found a clear morning, and sat down, and began to make plans to make a boy his son in front of gods, men, and the mirrors his wife adores. He drank only after he had made 3 good decisions and 2 acceptable compromises. He listened when Ned said a name he didn't like and did not shout. He let his hand rest on his seal and, for once, did not reach for a cup instead. Across the court, in a room where it is always a little too warm, Cersei Lannister did what the city had taught her to. She made a friend out of a man who thought he hated her, and an enemy out of a man who thought he loved her. She sent 3 letters. One to a father who liked words cut so finely they turned into weapons, one to a brother who knew how to make danger look like a joke, and one to a girl whose hair color no one would remember 15 years from now but whom she needed to place near a man she needed to ruin. She allowed herself to laugh once, briefly and without witnesses. Varys, that patient spider, lifted one piece from a board and put it down very carefully exactly where it would not be looked for while men counted the wrong things. "How interesting," he murmured again, because the world had accorded him the luxury of not being murdered for making the same observation twice. Littlefinger took a debt, shaved it, dressed it in silk, and sent it on as a favor. Pycelle sneezed and, when he looked at the cloth, thought wistfully of his youth before men started expecting him to know everything. And Jon, seated on a low bench in a passage where the light was always kind, watched a boy with a broom miss a corner and then go back and get it without being told, and thought very well. We will learn the corners. We have time. We will make certain that when the hammer comes down it hits the right place. He did not guess yet that for hammers to be well used a boy sometimes has to make himself look like a nail. He only looked down at the wolf and rested his hand where fur meets bone and felt under his own skin the slow gathering of a story that, if he were not careful, might start telling itself. He lifted his head then, and listened for the sound of his father's voice in the court below, and for the one's breath pattern he had taught himself in the northern nights. He heard both, and above both, softer than a knife being drawn, the city crept closer, mouth open, teeth ready, as all cities do when the thing they have asked for comes to them at last, with law behind it and wolves at its heel.